Good morning, afternoon, and evening. Welcome to the first semi-annual Robtastic Grab Bag Ranking event. Here is your host, Robert Lombardi.
What is up? How's it going? Alright, we're going to be ranking and reviewing songs today. Woo! Yeah! Alright, let's do this, people. Here we go. Greetings, everyone. It is I, the future Godfather, and welcome to the first ever installment of my brand new Grab Bag Ranking series, where you simply send songs to me and I rank and review them. However, this isn't the first time I'm making a video like this, as some of you may recall a similar series called Monthly Submission Rankings, which lasted from 2022 to 2024. And I even made episode 7 of Rob Geo Ranks back in 2021, which also followed the same concept. And now, fast forward to 2025, and this very concept is coming back in a big way. Back in January, I opened up requests for this video, and we wound up getting a grand spanking total of 132 song suggestions from 34 commenters who've participated in the voting and submission process, which is absolutely crazy to me, so thank you. In the end, I decided to boil it down to 50 songs, 40 of which were voted in by you guys, and 10 lesser voted songs that I handpicked myself. And man, I have to say, y'all absolutely chose these songs. I can say that this was probably one of the most difficult sets of songs I ever had to rank. About 90% of it was stuff that I considered unambiguously good, and the other 5% was either okay at best or meh at worst. Also, shout out to these 21 wonderful people who managed to get songs in for this video. Most of them are familiar faces from MSR, and some of them are newcomers. And to those newcomers, welcome aboard. Anyways, this is a great batch of songs for me to sort through, and I can't wait to dive into them. First things first, I'm going to take a moment to break down the tier system, and don't worry, this is the only time I'm going to explain this system in detail. From the second installment onwards, I'll refer viewers back to this video if you want to hear a breakdown of these tiers. Now then, here are the tiers. F tier is the collection of songs that I would consider bad, including the terrible stuff and the stuff that I deem among the worst of all time. Basically any song that I would rate below a 4 out of 10. E tier is the kinda bad stuff. Not super bad, but pretty mediocre all around. The actual 4 out of 10s. D tier is the mess stuff. You know, the average stuff, the shoulder shrug stuff, the songs of all time that exist, you get the picture. Those are the 5 out of 10s. C tier is the passable stuff. Songs that I don't consider properly good, but also aren't really that too shabby. Pretty much just the decent stuff, the 6 out of 10s. B tier is where we actually get into the good stuff. Songs that I mildly enjoy for what they are, the 7 out of 10s. A tier is the great stuff. Those are the very good songs that I definitely don't mind listening to again more than once, the 8 out of 10s. And finally, S tier, the cream of the crop. Stuff that I deem fantastic at the very least, and at best, personal all-timers / masterpieces. That's where the 9 out of 10s and 10 out of 10s are going to be grouped together. And yes, because of how this roster turned out to be, I'm happy to report that there are no F tier or E tier songs anywhere in this video. So, good job, guys. And finally, before we get into it, I'd like to let you all know that this ranking is ultimately just my opinion, and only reflects my thoughts and feelings on these songs at the time I'm making this video. Like I've said countless times before, don't feel bad if your songs didn't do well here. There's always next time. Don't take this seriously. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy me talking about some music for a long duration of time. Heck, I might not even agree with this ranking later, as some placements may change depending on what my mood is, hence why this list is not final. Like always, any form of constructive feedback is welcome, whether it be positive or negative. And you can feel free to address these to me in the comments below if you wish. Anyways, enough preamble. Now without any further ado, let the first semi-annual Robtastic Grab Bag Ranking event commence! Number 50, Nurse with Wound. I've plumbed this whole neighborhood. Here it is, the first bottom pick of my new Grab Bag series, and the only song in D tier. And honestly, I wasn't expecting it to be this. Nurse with Wound is a British former band that is nowadays a solo project run by Stephen Stapleton, and they dive into some very interesting genres like experimental, industrial, avant-garde, dark ambient, noise, and drone, just to name a few. They also have released a whopping 65 studio albums, and yes, this does include collaborative albums, but it's 66 if you count Crocodile Crazy Glue, a 2001 bootleg album of theirs, and I've Plumbed This Whole Neighborhood happens to be the second track from it. And as for what I think about it, yeah, this is a song, alright. This is definitely one of the most indescribably unique sounding tracks that's ever been requested and or submitted to me for a video like this. And certainly unnerving at that with the horrifying soundscapes that it provides. Very spooky pads combined with a plethora of desperate screams, as well as some weird vocal samples and siren-like sounds are mostly what take up 5.5 minutes of this track. And after hearing all of that, I'm just like, what in the ever-loving heck did I just listen to? And yeah, my thoughts kind of align with Isolated Regions of the Human Soul by Bowl of Heaven, in that it's not a track that I enjoy as much as I respect it. Although at least it's not 105 minutes in length. I do respect this track for being nothing like I've ever talked about on this channel, and I can see why people would appreciate this, as I feel like it would not feel out of place in either a horror movie or some sort of analog horror video, but really, at the end of the day, this one being at this spot boils down to it being a bit too much for me with its sheer creepiness factor, and it's not really my cup of tea as a result. It's not bad, it's just the one track in this batch that I unfortunately think sticks out like a sore thumb the most. I'm glad people can get some fun out of it, I'm just not one of those people. Sorry.
Number 49, Daft Punk, Musique.
Next up, we have a French electronic duo that hopefully should not need an introduction here. And yeah, them being this low on this ranking is probably going to attract a lot of pitchforks, but I digress. But I think it's interesting that a song that didn't appear on any of Daft Punk's mainline albums wound up getting pushed for me to review, as Musique was originally released in 1995 as the Virgin Records B-side of Daft Punk, and later appeared on a 2006 anthology as that project's opener. However, I don't think this is better than Daft Punk, nor would it be a big standout on Homework if it appeared on that album, but on its own merits, I think it's just okay. For starters, the titular Musique sample that can be heard throughout the majority of it sounds cool, which makes this track feel like a more fleshed out version of WGPK 83.7 FM. On top of that, it's nice how they managed to sample Dan Hartman's Instant Replay, which I honestly never knew about until now, so that's wild. Despite this, I don't feel as though they do much with these samples, even with the nice house production backing it up, although I do like the wah-wah-ish filter they use in some parts quite a bit. I also don't think the length on this one was entirely justified either. With the way these samples were utilized, I wouldn't mind this one being 3 or even 4 minutes long, but the near 7-minute length does kind of slightly exacerbate the seemingly minor issues I have with it, especially with the build-ups feeling like they take a while to reach these payoffs. I can think of other tracks of theirs that nail down this kind of repetitive style better. Say what you will about High Life. Despite it sounding a bit samey compared to most other tracks from Discovery, at least it has the decency to edit itself down to a length where I don't feel like it's overstaying its welcome. Hell, if you want an even fairer comparison, take my favorite song on Homework, High Fidelity, as another example. It's 6 minutes, yes, but they take the song Just the Way You Are by Billy Joel and actually do a lot with it throughout its runtime despite its repetitiveness. And it has even better build-ups and payoffs on top of it too. Overall, despite my issues with it, I think this is, again, an alright track from Daft Punk. This would not be one of the first tracks I think of when the name Daft Punk pops in my head, but the groove on it is cool, the house production is competent, and the samples are nicely integrated despite this track's progression. It's passable, just not properly good by the standards of their incredible discography.
Number 48, Osamu Sato and Yoshihiro Sawasaki, Absolute Community.
From an iconic name in electronic music, we move on to artists that I don't think a lot of you may be familiar with. Believe it or not, this is the second time I'll be talking about a track from Japanese composer Osamu Sato, as I've already reviewed an earlier track of his called Frozen Frogs quite favorably back in episode 20 of Monthly Submission Rankings, which I still think was a really good starting point for getting into his work. However, we'll instead go back to the year 2020 to review a track from his Grateful in All Things album, and the track Absolute Community sees him collaborating with fellow Japanese music producer Yoshihiro Sawasaki. And yeah, I have to say, compared to Frozen Frogs, I think this one is sadly a bit of a step down. But that doesn't inherently mean it's bad. On its face, this is a fine ambient techno-ish cut with a nice beat behind it once again, and I like how it slightly switches up at the 2:45 mark to give it kind of a proper ambient techno groove. Not to mention that the synths sound pleasant and go along really well with this production, including that arpeggiated synth lead at the beginning that kind of reminds me of Bike by Outer Girl a little bit, as well as some smooth pads, a nice bass line, and a bit of a funky synth lead to boot. The reason why I think this is not a step up from Frozen Frogs is how slightly unengaging it feels by comparison. What made that track stand out was the juxtaposition of that tribal-esque atmosphere that made you feel like you were exploring through an otherworldly and psychedelic dimension, and this hard-hitting energy to it that also made it so very danceable, especially with that foreign vocal sample and acidy bass line. With Absolute Community, this feels like the kind of stuff that I would play in the background while I'm doing other things, and this whole track to me screams Vibes, the song. Sure, the elements behind them are cool for what they are, but they don't feel like they're aiming to grab my attention as much, and it ultimately just kind of sounds like a rehash of the sounds that he already demonstrated on that track. As it stands though, even if it's something that I'm not going to be returning to often after this video goes up, it's decent. No more, no less.
Number 47, Plusol, Clock.
Next on the list of artists that I don't think I've heard of prior to a song getting sent to me, we have Plusol, a Canadian electronic artist from Vancouver who seems to mash organic instrumentals in with their own unique electronic sound design. At least that's the impression I've gotten from the bits I've heard so far. Clock, which just so happens to be a loose single they released over 4 years ago, is the name of the track I'm supposed to be reviewing, and after hearing it, I think it's kinda cool, even if it's not something that I personally get a lot out of compared to other listeners. The orchestral strings throughout the track are nice to listen to despite them feeling like they meander a bit, and they also gel well with some nice vocal chops in the second half. I also really like that rock climax at the end too, alongside that strong viola lead to give it a bit of an anthemic vibe. However, yeah, I'm sorry. What prevented this track from reaching that 7 out of 10 range has to be that hardcore drop a minute and 10 seconds in. Even if the build-up is admittedly pretty fire, that payoff just unfortunately kind of ruined the momentum a little bit, and it doesn't help that the bass doesn't really mesh well with the aforementioned strength to my ears. But at the end of the day, what I'm saying is always going to be subjective, and I respect the risk they've taken with this approach. I always admire artists who bring something different to the table, and if you do like that drop, that's fantastic, more power to you. To me, it's personally the only dislikable part of an otherwise cool track for what it is, and the good elements do outweigh that one part to the point where I can't really complain about it all that much. Overall, it's yet another decent track. Feel free to send me more stuff from them. I'd be eager to give more of their stuff a chance.
Number 46, Ween, I Can't Put My Finger on It.
Man, it's been a minute since I've last talked about a standalone track from Ween, who are still one of the weirdest and most out-of-the-box bands in music history. But instead of focusing on a track from the Mollusk, let's take a look at an album that I covered in the 3rd episode of Robert's Recharge Mega Collabs last year, Chocolate and Cheese. Although I don't think this specific album is better than the Mollusk or the Pod, I still commend them for showing a bit of maturity in their sound, while also retaining the charm that made them so interesting to begin with. It's a generally great album that I still think almost holds up to the same extent as those two records. With all that being said, I've never really considered I Can't Put My Finger on It to be one of my favorites here, but for this being one of the album's worst tracks, it's still pretty tolerable, hence why it's at the top of seats here. For starters, the lyrics most likely are about what it feels like to take hallucinogenic drugs, as evident by some lines in the verses where lead singer Gene Ween asks questions like, is it alive? Does it writhe? Can it survive under the sun? And, can it squeal? Does it squirm? If it's fresh, will it burn? There's also this possible sexual reference in the bridge, but yeah, I don't need to get into that. Moving on to the instrumentation, I personally think it isn't as good as the rest of the track listing, but I do like those guitars working well off these bongos and some beach-esque noises in between the verses, and parts like these are why I do really appreciate this band's sense of uniqueness. Also, that electric guitar going through this flanger effect of the bridge goes hard, and that Phrygian dominant-ish melody towards the end is intriguing too. As it stands though, this is not a track I see myself returning to often, and given that it's just under 3 minutes, it doesn't provide much substance for me to comment on beyond its lyrical and instrumental qualities, no pun intended, but it's a decent little number from this band that kind of gets stuck in my head from time to time.
Number 45, Music, Beatnik number 2.
Alright, we're at the start of B tier, and as such, I'm happy to say that this is the first track in this batch that I consider to be good. See, I told y'all this list was stacked, and honestly, I can't think of a better way to open up this tier than by taking another look at Mike Paradinas yet again. An artist who I've talked about, or at least mentioned, quite a few times on the channel. So anyone who's especially tuned into episodes 22 and 26 of Monthly Submission Ranking should already be familiar with him. Well, his work under Music, that is. He's also one I've been keeping tabs on for a while now, and for dang good reason. He's made plenty of gems over the years, with earlier albums of his like Love Limbo, Royal Astronomy, and Lunatic Harness still holding up to this day. Even his later albums are decent to good all around as well. I'm telling you man, this dude's music is still not appreciated enough. But given that this is the start of a new Grab Bag series, it's only fitting that we take a small gander at his humble beginnings as a producer. Studio album wise anyway. And that's by taking a look at what I consider to be another defining moment in IDM and drill and bass, and one of my favorite debut albums ever, Tango Invective. However, a good number of other tracks from this album would have done well here, so it's kind of weird that Beatnik number 2 of all things got pushed for me to review, but regardless, I think this is pretty darn good. His production here is just as good as it always has been, as the synths and lead melody are done well here, especially when they get backed up by this really cool chord progression that makes me feel a sense of comfort, and the nice chimes going along with the kinda slow and plodding beat really make for a lovely combination as well. It's kind of like a Christmas track, but also not really, given it's June right now, so whatever. I digress. It's the vibe that comes to mind when I think of this mixture of sounds. The only reason why I merely like it and nothing more is because it does get a teeny bit stale halfway through, even despite being all there is to it, and this standalone track doesn't come close to the amount of emotional resonance I get from other tracks like Swan Vesta or Burnt Sienna, for instance. I don't love it. I think that'd be pushing it a little bit. But whenever it's on, I do find some mild enjoyment out of this for getting me a bit lost in the world that this track sets up. And for that, this gets my respect.
Number 44, Astrophysics, Antithesis.
Now we're already back to more artists that I'm very new to. Next on the docket is Astrophysics, a Brazilian electronic music producer from Rio de Janeiro, and from the pieces I've heard, their music is more or less new wave. At the start, with albums like Astro's Bizarre Discotheque and Synthetic Magic in 2020, their style of new wave seemed to be a bit lighthearted in nature, and it wasn't until 2021's Cute Tragedies and 2022's Hope Left Me that they really started to go for a darker approach to their new wave style, while also experimenting with other genres like breakcore, shoegaze, drum and bass, and goth rock, which are all things I never thought I'd put in the same sentence, but I digress. Anyhow, let's fast forward to 2024, where they released their most recent album, The Unending Need for Perpetual Motion, which sort of continues to evoke that same dark style as the last two albums I've mentioned. And that should take us to one of the tracks that I'll be discussing, Antithesis. And to get straight to the point, this track is pretty cool. The breakbeats go along nicely with some guitars and low-key synths to make a fairly ethereal and atmospheric sound. Moreover, their soft and low vocals also fit well with this sort of production, and the amen breaks at the 352 mark sound kick-ass as heck. I mean, I am a sucker for some good amen breaks, what am I supposed to say? Also, given that this album is also dedicated to their father and their cat, I'm not surprised at there being any sort of lyricism that means a lot to the artists themselves, and possibly to a number of listeners. But while we're talking about the lyricism, it mostly doesn't catch my attention as much as the production itself, but looking into said lyrics, this one verse actually did kind of stick out to me. Tomorrow will be different. I'm always repeating this phrase. Unable to control the haste, I feel insane. I feel insane. More notably with those first two lines, I could kind of relate those to how I'm feeling so far with the state of 2025, much less the 2020s in general. It's like you're hoping for something different in a good way, but instead, with each passing day, you're met with chaos, uncertainty, and well, insanity as it were. With all that being said, if I had at least one misgiving with it, the production does overpower the vocals a little bit, hence why the lyricism didn't catch my attention as much on first listen, aside from that one verse, and also because of that, it did kind of prevent the hooks on this one from becoming even stronger for me. On top of that, I don't know if I could call this groundbreaking production-wise, but other than that, as long as I keep sitting with this track in the context of this album and familiarize myself more with their work, I do see the potential for this to grow on me.
Number 43, Cassius 1999 radio edit.
More French house, anyone? Well, sure, why not? Cassius was a duo that was one of the pioneers of the French touch movement of electronic music in the latter half of the 90s. You know, kind of like Daft Punk in a way when they came through with their own style of the genre with Homework. Originally consisting of Philippe Zidar and Boom Bass, the former of whom sadly passed away in an accident in 2019, they've only released 6 studio albums throughout their career, with the debut album from 1999 being the one we're taking a look at. Aptly named, well, 1999, this album sees the duo kind of run the gamut with the genres they're offering here, from French house to synth pop to even a little bit of big beat. And one of the tracks you'll come across is one of their most recognizable tracks, Cassius 1999. Or more specifically, the radio edit version that, for some reason, sounds vastly different from the original version that opens up the album. And what do I think of it? Well, it's good. From the get-go, I can see why this track got so popular, as the French house production itself sounds nicely polished, the Cassius in the house tagline is catchy, and the samples lifted from If It Hurts Just a Little by Donna Summer bounce off said production well, resulting in a flavorful tune on the surface. The French house regular, if you will. In my opinion, this track is also a more upgraded version of Daft Punk's musique from earlier. Much like that track, Cassius 1999 radio edit doesn't do too much with the sample, but what gets this track the big edge into good territory is how it actually edits itself down to a tolerable length, which puts the repetitive nature of it all at a nice advantage. But now that leads us to the question, hey Rob, how does this compare to the original Cassius 1999? Well, yeah, I prefer the original version a bit more. I think that version has a better groove, a better use of its unchanging progression, and a finer usage of its lively atmosphere. And man, do I like me a good big beat track with a sick bass line or what. But you know what? That's not to take away from this radio edit's most pronounced qualities, even if it's one that I don't think is the absolute best of its genre. Overall, despite being one I wanted to like more, it's also one I admire for being a nice showcase for what this genre brings to the table. Good stuff.
Number 42, Gong, Flying Teapot.
Next up is another artist I can already tell from the first listen that they have a uniqueness to their sound that strikes me as a bit more otherworldly compared to most other artists I've covered here. Kinda like Ween before Ween, if you know what I mean. Hey, that rhymed. Originally formed in Paris, France, Gong is a rock band that leans more on the psychedelic, progressive, space, and jazz sides of their musical style. And as someone who's admittedly an outsider to their work, I was very curious to see what they had to offer when the title track from their 1973 album Flying Teapot was sent in. And boy, what an introduction this is. This is a solid 11-minute long demonstration of what they can do with their aforementioned styles. And that's being backed up by some lyrics that sort of give out vibes similar to that of I Can't Put My Finger on It from earlier. Except it's a bit more executed here, as it seems to tell the listener to not only relax and have a cup of tea as it were, but also to love others by being selfless and expecting that in return through karma. At least that's what I'm getting at from these lines in the verses anyway. I also really like that exuberant vocal performance from the late David Allen, as that in turn helps him sell what he's saying while also carrying this song to the best of its ability. Especially when he sings lines like flying saucer, flying teacup, from outer space, flying teapot, that are indeed catchy. Moreover, the instrumentation is also pretty good on average as well. I think that 2-minute dramatic and borderline spooky intro has a really nice sense of tension, painting a really interesting landscape that neatly builds up into the meat of this track. Along with that, the drumming and guitars complement Allen's energy and charisma nicely, that funky bass riff is pretty cool, and that lively sax solo 4 minutes in goes hard as heck and flatters the groove well too. However, the last 2 minutes don't do a whole lot for me. That part is a bit too sparse for my liking, as it doesn't go beyond some moaning sounds, percussion, and a reprise of that ascending piano line that also appeared at the 9:10 mark. It's the sole part I feel takes a backseat on this track's flow just a touch, but otherwise, this is a track that's sort of held up in my eyes. Even for 1973 standards, this is still worth hearing at least once to give yourself an idea of what they're all about. Really eager to talk more about them when I do get the chance.
Number 41, Romance Planet, Alone in the Dark.
Okay, I don't think I've ever talked about a happy hardcore techno crossbreed type of song before, but one thing you should know about me is that I do love me a challenge, and I feel Romance Planet is a pretty interesting artist to start with in this regard. Well, okay, after previewing some of their tracks, I can't say all of them evoke that sound, but this 2024 song Alone in the Dark closely resembles that sort of style? I don't know, I'm kind of bad with subgenres sometimes, but the point is, I think this is pretty good as well. Honest to God, this song kind of sounds like the stuff that would go viral on TikTok. Hell, there's even a Nightcore version of this song for crying out loud. But there's something about the production itself that hits on a more nostalgic level, and it certainly leaps above all those mediocre at best Brazilian funk songs Searman would review in his analysis of dance series. To start, the synths sound very nice and complement well with this happy hardcore-ish production, as this lovely combination reminds me a little of these old trance songs that would appear in videos made using Windows Movie Maker back in the late 2000s/early 2010s. Man, those were good times, I swear. Also, that pulsating bass line is cool and provides this track with a bit of oomph that I do appreciate, and the way this song starts, where it gradually speeds up in tempo and pitch, is pretty fire, I'm not gonna lie. And that's not even mentioning the vocals, and while I wouldn't say they're perfect, they do fit with the tone of the song like a glove. And I like the way they get chopped up quite a bit in some parts of the production. Best part of the song by far has to be somewhere in the second half, where that soft piano melody builds up into that hard-hitting production once again. It's pretty rad. Despite all of that, there's not much more I can say about it, not only due to its very short length, but also due to there not being a lot of information about said artist. But at the end of the day, a good song is a good song. And in my opinion, this is an example of that indeed. This track's aim is nothing more than to make you have a good time, and I'd say it did its job fairly well, even if it sounds a bit cheesy sometimes. Nice stuff.
Number 40, Weird Al Yankovic, Albuquerque.
We did it, y'all! Weird Al Yankovic has entered the building. I'm sure we're all familiar with this guy, known for making some dang good parody songs like Amish Paradise, Polka Face, The Saga Begins, Eat It, and others. He even appeared in Epic Rap Battles of History one time. But as it turns out, he's also responsible for his own fair share of original songs as well. And Albuquerque, the closing track off of his Running with Scissors album from 1999, is one of them. By far, this also happens to be the longest song Al has ever conjured up at over 11 minutes in length. Which makes sense when you find out that this is also supposed to take on the style of the Rugburns, who are especially known for making very lengthy songs too. And yeah, I'll just say it. It's quite amazing that he wrote this with the intention of annoying his listeners, yet it became a fan favorite in his entire catalog. And you know what? I think it's understandable. Given that it's such a long song, I shouldn't really need to tell you that there's so much going on lyrically, but I think Al utilizes this length fairly well here. This song is about a fictionalized version of his life and his various anecdotes in relation to his time in the titular city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Insert Breaking Bad reference here. He also often goes on about these weird stories, like talking about winning a ticket to the city after almost correctly guessing the number of molecules in Leonard Nimoy's butt, listing off all the things he took with him after the plane he went on crashed on a hillside, being excited about how fluffy the tiles of the Holiday Inn are, the moment he went to a donut shop after some guy stole his snorkel, meeting a girl named Zelda who he married and then divorced after not being up to the prospect of joining the Columbia Record Club, getting his dream job at the Sizzler, and biting out of some guy's vein after he literally tells him that he hasn't had a bite in 3 days, only to come to the conclusion that yes, he does indeed hate sauerkraut. It really defines the term all over the place, and I won't lie, describing all that just kinda broke my brain a tad, but the lyrics are really good and kinda funny all the same, even though they are very random and unorthodox. I also like how there are two distinctive pre-chorus-like parts, one that's strictly dedicated to reciting part of the standard airplane safety instructions, and the other being centered around the "if you'd like to make a call, please hang up and try again" automated message, which for the record actually makes for a nice bait and switch joke after that familiar voice lyric. I also have to give credit to the backbone that is this track's enthusiastic instrumental, which is also really good and fits nicely with Al's energy throughout this song. I'd be a fool not to point out that catchy as all hell chorus, and I gotta say, Jim West can shred on that guitar with those solos at the 536 and 750 marks. And same thing goes for John Bermuda Schwartz on drums, especially at that grand ending. Furthermore, it's neat that even though Al is mostly speaking almost the entire time, it feels like he fits perfectly with the song's timing and pulse as well. Even after all that I've said, it's not a great song. He does tend to get a bit much with explaining these stories, especially when they take forever to get to the chorus, and to explain them only to circle back to his point of hating sauerkraut makes for a pretty jumbled mess of a song, but it's a good mess all things considered.
Number 39, We Love Katamari OST, Katamari on the Swing.
Alright, how's about we go for a more change of pace, shall we? The previous 11 tracks I've reviewed in detail have one thing in common that separates them from this next song I'm talking about now. That thing being, as far as I'm concerned, that they have not appeared in any video games. To be blunt though, I feel kind of unqualified to talk about this one. Not because I don't like playing video games, I do for the most part, but talking about them still has never been my forte, nor will it likely ever be that at any point in the future. Regardless, as I've said before, I'm always up for a challenge, and I'm very happy to see other people get so connected to a song from a different form of media to the point of actually wanting me to review it. So, details! This song, Katamari on the Swing, comes from the 2005 video game We Love Katamari, originally released on July 7th in Japan and later released in North America that same year on September 20th. Given that this game was released a year after I was born and I've never owned a PlayStation 2, I can't really say I'm that familiar with this game outside of this song getting sent in for this video, but even being divorced from that context, I personally think this is a rock solid, colorful little jazzy number that I can only imagine fits the vibe for what this game is trying to set. Firstly, I have to commend Shigeru Matsuzaki for delivering a clearly passionate vocal performance that gels well with the instrumentation, especially when he's inviting the listener to the world of this track with a good old "come on, everybody!" and further showcasing his energy and range throughout by belting out notes in his upper register while also acknowledging this song's dynamics. I can tell from that performance that he seems to be a talented artist, and I'm pleased to know that he's also had other contributions to the Katamari Damacy soundtracks, because this dude can really give it his all on the mic. Secondly, I do gotta appreciate how palatable this instrumental sounds. Sometimes it feels like every single element about this track feels like it's overwhelmingly throwing so much of itself at me that it's kind of hard to analyze, which perhaps may be why it's being held back from being properly great, but still, I gotta appreciate it all the same. The trumpets sound really cool, particularly in that intro where they fit well with that synthly like peanut butter and jelly, and those na-na-na choirs are pretty memorable once I hear them. My favorite part has to be towards the middle of the track, where it sounds like the song is ending, only for it to cut into what I can only describe as rhythmically timed knee slapping. Talk about another good bait and switch moment right there. Also, whoever was on that piano absolutely ate on that solo nearly 3 minutes in, for real, for real. In conclusion, even though there's a bit too much going on for me to like this a bit more, I still can't help but acknowledge all the good things that make me not only ignore any possible cons I have with it, but also make this a solid listening experience even for people who aren't necessarily into video games. Really nice stuff.
Number 38, Mihoa and Tongdat, Ai Ve Song Tuong.
And of course, this wouldn't be complete without at least one Vietnamese pop song for good measure, even in the first installment of MSR's Successor. And yeah, anyone who has watched monthly submission rankings before knows that usually, Viet pop songs don't have the best track record with me, as seen with my reviews on songs like Tin Yu Tam Nong by Nu Mai, Goi Tin Tran Nam by Hopka, Duo Chua Noi by Don Ho, and Jia Tai Kwa Me by Gan Li, which I thought were all truly, unashamedly, meh. The problem with these tracks was that there was simply nothing much for me to latch onto, whether it be due to them lacking interesting moments to catch my attention, the production sounding a bit cheap, or just being boring, tedious, repetitive, and or forgettable. Sometimes a mix of all three of these things. So color me surprised when I say that Ai Ve Song Tuong by Mi Hoa and Tong Dat is actually pretty solid. Probably right up there with Moi Shuang Dao Dien by Nu Keen and The Son as the best Viet pop song I've reviewed on the channel yet. This is also the penultimate song off of the 1984 compilation Paris by Night, and if I can describe this one song, it's sort of like a Donna Summer song, but with an obvious Vietnamese flair to it, as Mi Hoa doesn't sound out of place on this groovy and upbeat disco production, acting as the perfect sonic landscape for the kind of vocal performance they're providing here, which honestly feels a bit more engaging in comparison to some of these other artists on those Viet pop songs I've reviewed once before. Their vocals are just silky smooth and nothing more, but there's something slightly hypnotizing about said vocals that actually has me invested throughout a good deal of this track, even despite me not knowing what the heck she's singing about. I'm really liking this production too. The synths on this one sound very nice, particularly in the beginning where it reminds me of a pinball machine. I can't explain why, but it does. I also like these whooshing sounds in some parts of the first half of this tune to give it a zany kind of vibe, and the trumpets slap across the board as well. Quickly going back to these synths, I do gotta hand it to some of these grand chord progressions backing them up, especially in a few parts of the song where Mi Hoa is singing a melody that I assume is acting as the hook. Finally, I also do appreciate the parts where every other instrument aside from the drums cut off. And while it's not what I consider the biggest highlight of the song outright, I still have to give that some credit for actually allowing this song to change things up a bit instead of staying in that same place throughout its runtime. To end this segment, I'm not gonna say this is mind-blowing for disco standards by any means, and I'll admit to feeling this song's 7-minute length a little, but this is still really good all things considered. Keep at it with submitting these types of songs, DEC. Maybe someday you'll wind up submitting a Viet pop song that I properly love.
Number 37, Rick Astley, Together Forever.
Not even 5 track segments after I've talked about Albuquerque, and we're already up to a song from another artist known for a certain meme that I'm sure we're all familiar with. And yes, I'm of course referring to the Rickrolling guy himself, Rick Astley, who I'm also confident does not need an introduction at this point. However, I can't talk about Together Forever without at least briefly mentioning my thoughts on Never Gonna Give You Up, which was sent to me back in episode 2 of MSR, where it actually did very well, and for good reason too. Whether or not you appreciate the meme can be debatable, but I still think the song itself is fantastic, with a dope bass line, well-integrated string melodies, and one of the most infectious hooks to have ever been conceived by any human being. It's aged very well. The lyricism on that one may not go beyond your typical lovey-dovey pop number, but Rick somehow found a way to sell what he's saying there by basically putting his whole soul into every single word, even in that catchy as all hell hook. And I absolutely love it for that. I must confess, I've never listened to Whenever You Need Somebody in full, but I think that would most likely be my favorite song on that album if I did so. The reason why I wanted to get my thoughts on that song out of the way first is because they simply sound very similar to each other, especially considering the way the chord progressions are structured, as well as both of them having fairly surface level lyrical formulas. But yeah, I'll just get straight to it with this one as well. I think Together Forever is really good, but calling it better than Never Gonna Give You Up is a bit of a stretch in my eyes. That should not take away from this song's best qualities though, as the production is also just as nice. It has a really cool bass line, a flavorful mixture of string sections and electric pianos, and an interesting quick modulation from B minor to E minor 2 minutes in, which all make for a fairly satisfying and purposeful groove. But the most important thing about it that it did get right is, again, the hook. And it is also a damn near great sounding one at that nicely showcases the charisma and energy of his vocals that I have come to respect him for. The other big thing about it that I heavily appreciate is the sort of connection both of these songs have. While Never Gonna Give You Up is about Rick promising that he'll be loyal to his lover, Together Forever is essentially what you're getting when the good ending is at play, which seems to me that they would forever be together as it were, and always be there for each other, which kinda sounds awfully cliche to say, but whatever. I'm not going to confirm whether or not that was what he was going for. I feel like I've talked nonsense before, let's be real, but I commend it for working well off of that song in a storyline kind of context. At the end of the day, however, Together Forever is mostly just Diet Never Gonna Give You Up and nothing more. While the musical ingredients that contribute to the making of this track are likable, they don't do what that track does better that can allow it to have even longer lasting staying power for me. And yes, even though the passion is still there, I think it was also better displayed in that signature song as well. On its own terms though, this is still a very nice and danceable tune that I don't mind listening to whenever it's on. Doesn't quite make the top 10 this time around, but taking the quality of this roster into account, I can say this is another win for the Rickrolling Man. Pretty good stuff.
Number 36, Yukihiro Takahashi, Flashback.
Alright, we're finally getting into the first of 10 of my Rob picks. Or should I say the first ever Rob pick for this all-new Grabback series overall. And to start that off, we have Yukihiro Takahashi, whose name was synonymous as a member of none other than the Yellow Magic Orchestra, who are basically like Kraftwerk's very own Japanese equivalent. Albums like the self-titled YMO album from 1978 and Solid State Survivor from 1979, for instance, helped contribute to the development of techno, which led them to become popularizers of the electropop boom of the 80s, as well as pretty influential figures in electronic music just in general. And I think it's easy to see why, as they have a lot of good material to dive into under this collective. But as you can see, this is nowhere near the focal point of what I'll be discussing right now. Eventually, there came a time when Takahashi, along with the two other former YMO members, Ryuichi Sakamoto and Haruomi Hosono, had each released their own solo work. And Takahashi's fourth album from 1982, What Me Worry, turned out to be a neat collection of pleasant-sounding synth-pop and techno-pop that I liked quite a bit despite its sameness. And what do you know, track 5 off this album, Flashback, is also pretty solid too. I really like the sound of this track, as the synths overscoring the mix sound very pretty, especially throughout the whole thing where it gives off kind of a reggae-like rhythm. I also love the inclusion of some strings to give this track a slight sense of drama, the chord progressions themselves that sound quite nostalgic, definitely living up to its title, and that beautiful piano playing at the beginning provided by Sakamoto, which totally adds to this track's laid-back environment. On top of all that, Takahashi's mellow vocals sound really good and fit well with the production itself. To be honest, I kind of prefer when he sings in his lower register, as I feel it goes along with the vibes I get from this track in a more seamless manner, although I have no problem with him going a bit higher in his range as well. Again, he sounded really good as a vocalist. Believe it or not, the best part of this song to me actually has to go to the lyrics that Yukihiro Takahashi sings over. Without them, this would probably still be in B tier, but a little lower on the list. But with them, this elevates this song to being almost great outright. The lyrics in this song seem to be about a dying romantic relationship, but the narrator also seems to remember all the times they've had with their past lover, even as the memories start fading away beyond the nature-like metaphors that Takahashi provides at the start of the song. The two people in this song may have never understood each other all along, but deep down in his broken heart, the narrator is still feeling these moments, let alone thinking about them even in the toughest of times. My interpretation of these lyrics may not be the best, but I still really like the way they've been implemented here, because they allow this song to have a bit more depth beyond my favorite aspects of the production, and also allow it to have an isolated and somber undertone to an otherwise mainly reflective sonic palette. In conclusion, this is a very nice track overall with a fairly strong emotional appeal to me, and I'll be looking forward to appreciating this a lot more as time passes on. Solid, but beautiful with its storytelling all the same.
Number 35, Grashtanskaya Oborona, Long and Happy Life.
You know, I think making videos like this is fun, metaphorically speaking, because sometimes doing so makes me feel like a world traveler. For example, we are now going from Japan to up north in Russia to talk about this next artist we have here. Grashtanskaya Oborona was a Soviet-Russian band that first formed in the city of Omsk in 1984, making them be one of the earliest Soviet and Russian psychedelic and punk rock bands. However, they disbanded in 1985, then reunited in 1986, then disbanded again in 1990, then reunited again in 1993, then disbanded yet again in 2008, then reunited once more after an 11-year hiatus in 2019, and then split up yet again in 2020. Yep, they've broken up and regrouped 4 separate times, and even with a lot of members coming and going over the years, that's pretty crazy. But that's not what I want to talk about. With this being my first time hearing about them, I didn't know what to expect when the title track from their 2004 album, Long and Happy Life, got voted in, but I also thought this was damn good stuff upon first listen. Although I'm probably not gonna have that many things to say about it compared to some of these other tracks I've ranked below it. Mainly because I find the instrumentation to not have that much going on in terms of structure, but that's not really a complaint I have with it, just an observation. Despite this, the instrumentation is pretty enjoyable, as it reminds me a teeny bit of Californication by Red Hot Chili Peppers for some reason. Okay, they don't sound that similar to each other, the difference between Anthony Kiedis and the late Igor Letov's vocals is vast, But I do feel as though both tracks do have a bit of a similar timbre or texture to their sound that I like in songs like this. I gotta say, I'm digging the mixture of the guitars and organs over here, especially when they are backed up by these chord progressions that give this one a sense of theatrics. And yeah, those soaring guitars that take up the middle and end really make the track, don't they? And all of these things are completely disregarding the low but charismatic vocals coming from the aforementioned Igor Letov, which also contribute to the atmosphere of this song very nicely, even when the guitars in particular are admittedly suppressing his vocals just a touch. But yeah, of course the lyrics do elevate this one for me, as Letov also provides very interesting imagery throughout, especially at this part of the song with these equally as interesting nature-like metaphors. I think the line that has resonated with me the most by far has to be "Evil Twilight of an Immortal Day." With this line, I can also relate that to the state of the world in 2025, especially on the political side of things. It's like the uncertainty caused by scary things happening in the world is acting as the evil twilight in this never-ending cycle we'd call the immortal day. As it stands though, I think this song is really good once again. The instrumental is nice, the melodic choices his band make are rock solid, and the lyrics do a great job with giving this track more depth. I think I should check out more from them.
Number 34, Polyphia, The Audacity, featuring Anomaly.
If you thought the jazz stuff stopped with Katamari on the Swing, think again, because as it turns out, there's more where that came from. For my second rock pick, we'll be taking a look at a track from Polyphia, a Dallas, Texas-based rock band, and just by skimming through some of their albums, I can immediately tell that they've had an intriguing progression as artists, to say the least. Seriously, listening to their latest album first and then checking out their other stuff really did give me a case of tonal whiplash, as they started out with an alternative metal sound on their first few projects before completely changing it up with a jazz rock, hip-hop, rap, and trap fusion in the form of their most recent album from 2022, Remember That You Will Die. And to summarize what I thought about that album, my thoughts kind of start and end with, it's cool for what it is, but I wish I liked it way more than I do. Don't get me wrong, it's certainly a commendable one at that. Not everyone is attempting to mash these genres together in the way this band has, especially at the time it came out. But a con I have with it is that sometimes the trap influences wind up clashing with its overarching jazz tones, which makes it not sound good to my ears, like on the track Fuck Around and Find Out with Snot. Alongside that, while there are a lot of moments on that project I liked, I also wish some of these tracks were developed more, like on ABC with Sophia Black. But the track on here that wound up sticking out the best to me has to be The Audacity. And despite this running on the shorter side at nearly 2.5 minutes, it's only just detailed and or developed enough for me to call this my favorite of the bunch. I think those jazz and trap styles worked off each other better than on every other track in the track listing, as those riffy electric and bass guitars are mixed so cleanly with the precise production on display to give it a slight sense of edge and attitude. Like, man, this has got to be one of the highlights of this ranking in the mixing department. I think this one's also mostly carried by contributions coming from Canadian producer and keyboardist Anomaly, who bounces off well with Polyphia's sound design like it's another walk in the park for him. And that playful, high-pitched synth solo appearing nearly 90 seconds in is probably the biggest highlight of this track. The moment I heard that synth, I was just like, this has gotta be Anomaly, right? Because it's a great addition that feels reminiscent of my favorite moments off of his most recent full-length album, Gallery, which, mind you, came out the same year as Remember That You Will Die. Also, can we talk about this impeccable groove? I thought this driving, pulsating groove felt very natural to the kind of sound they were going for, especially with that ride cymbal colliding nicely with that aforementioned synth lead to further amp up the energy. I can't get enough of it. In my opinion, this is really the closest a track in this video has gone to being outright great. But a slight drawback for me is, again, the short length. Sure, these guys did their absolute damnedest to make sure every moment in these 2 short minutes mattered, and they do utilize this length very well. But I would have liked it even more if there was another part to it that fell more off the beaten path, while still feeling in place with this track's tone. Especially with these great melodic structures backing up the guitars. If they did even more, in a sense, tricks to further flatter the groove, I think I would have this in much higher regard, but I don't want to be too nitpicky. This is a really solid track from these two artists with a lot of likable production and instrumental choices that instill quite a flavorful landscape. It's a B-tier song in A-tier clothing, which, speaking of...
Number 33, Square Pusher, and Bounce.
And just like that, we are finally in A tier. The songs that I truly think are great. And I'm happy to report that there are 19 songs in this tier to get through. A whopping 38% of this entire roster. God damn. And honestly, I couldn't think of a better way to start off this tier than by talking about electronic music legend Tom Jenkinson, aka Square Pusher, an artist who I believe to be a certified maestro in amalgamating styles of drill and bass, jungle, and jazz fusion together, and also one I've already made videos centering around his work in the past. I talked about Square Pusher's theme in MSR21 back in 2023, and a year before that, in 2022, when I still did Rob Geomega collabs, I also did a whole 6th season on all of his Mail-In albums, plus Budokan Mindphone and Numbers Lucent. Yes, nearly every single one of his Square Pusher projects. Well, that is, except for Dastro Time. Dastro Time is an interesting one in his catalog, in that, despite this being inspired by the novel, eerie, sublime silence of the COVID-19 lockdown, and the sound of this thing mostly reflecting that, it also sounds like a culmination of nearly everything he's done before. You know, kinda like a legacy album of some kind. The immaculate jazz fusion tones of earlier albums like Hard Normal Daddy, Music is Right at One Note, Ultra Visitor, and Hello Everything. The analog and synthesized oriented D&B and acid techno flourishes that were prominently demonstrated on Selection 16 and Go Plastic. Even his clashing dark and futuristic tendencies that further double down on those styles to say with you Fabulum, Damigan Fairies, and Be Able Hello. It's all there, coming together in full force. I'd even argue a lot of what Dastro Time delivers really does improve upon the styles of his more recent work too. And if the second track, Endbounds, proves one other thing aside from that, it's that he pretty much still has it in the bag, even 30 plus years into his career. This track sounds really nice all the way through. I'd say it's right up there with Wenderlawn as my favorite track on this album. Melodically speaking, this one's pretty damn satisfying, as it even catches my ear very nicely at the start with these organish synths being backed up by this unique chord progression that sounds like they wouldn't feel out of place in a Haunted Mansion game. And it transitions so cleanly into this more contemporary sounding minor progression 44 seconds in that also blends in well with some 808 hi-hats. Man, this shit really tickles my brain, doesn't it? However, despite this track staying in that same progression throughout 85 to 90% of it, Tom manages to add in more layers to it that not just make it sound all the more exciting and worthwhile, but also add in a greater sense of dynamics and dramatic stakes to further have the listener invested. That delicate synth melody beginning around 100 seconds in is tasty as heck, and that analog bass happening a minute after that is actually mixed in very well. The way it goes up and down an octave at some points is a fun touch too, as it definitely has those callbacks to some of my favorite moments off of his more recent material popping in my head. But wow, the moment this kick drum appears 3.5 minutes in as the synths get more intense is absolutely powerful, but in a good way. And I love the way said kick goes for a gabber kind of approach at some points to provide a much needed driving force for this track. But I'll be a total weirdo and say that a small complaint I have with it is the mixing at times being a bit wonky, as at some listens of this thing, I occasionally found the synths and beats to clash with each other a bit too much for me, especially at that climax. But I also understand that this is intentional, with this being a part of an album where every track is a callback to his past stuff and all. Other tracks on this album, such as Hollerform, Kronmech, and even Wenderlawn, may not have the best mixing either, but the well-executed melodic structures and layering are what made those tracks also enjoyable to me. And the same thing could also be said for my favorite moments on Eufabulum as well, like 4001 and Energy Wizard. And I'll also admit that there were times when I felt that the track needed to edit itself down a bit in order for me to not feel the length as much, but really, those things don't necessarily hinder my enjoyment of this one either. This is some damn good stuff right there that shows Square Pusher's ability to keep the sound fresh in spite of this track's derivative style. Looking forward to the day Dastro Time gets requested to me again for Robert's Recharge Mega Collabs, as I would love to make a video of that kind on this album sometime. You know, for the sake of completionism.
Number 32, Outtaker, C/Pack.
Oh, hello again, Sean Booth and Rob Brown. Funny how I mentioned you two early in the video, and here we are taking a gander at one of your older tracks. It's also been a while since I've last talked about them on the channel too, so to get you guys back up to speed as to who they are an English electronic duo who first gained recognition after appearing on the first installment of Warp Records' series of artificial intelligence compilations in 1992, alongside the likes of Speedy J, Dr. Alex Patterson of The Orb, Richard D. James as the Dice Man, the duo B12 as Musicology, the group The Black Dog as IAO, and Richie Houghton as Up. And yeah, anyone already familiar with their discography knows how interesting the evolution of their sound has gotten over time. And I think this is especially pronounced in their consistently great run of their first 3 albums. Incunabula's offering of mainly techno and ambient stylings turned out to be the least indicative as to what they would later go on to do, while Amber was decidedly more spacious and ambient and put a lot less emphasis on percussive elements. But Try Repeat A is where Outtaker's IDM sound design as we know it starts to take shape, incorporating more minimal rhythms and spacious melodies. And I'll just say it, this is one of my favorite albums they've released, especially in the 90s. Despite the tracks on here sounding a little repetitive, I also love how they sound stylistically different from each other, which not only makes a whole lot of room for variety, but also has all of them come together beautifully in one pristine IDM package, and C/Pack in particular is definitely one of its highlights for sure. This track is on the more relaxing side, but that doesn't make it any less than really good. Right off the gate, I think the metallic wub bass is the best part of it, as it sounds like it's total ear candy to me while simultaneously feeling at home with this track's mega intricate yet danceable backbone. But that's obviously not the only thing that defines the track altogether. The beats and percussion in general sound very kick-ass and obviously fit with this album's overall aesthetic solidly. Especially at some parts of it where it sounds like bongos are coming in, and man, that just goes so hard. The bongos may be a small part of it, but they do such a good job with providing a bit of a foreign atmosphere to it that I am heavily down for. And the same thing could also be said about these delicate and jovial little synths that also contribute to this track's essence very nicely here, especially towards the end where the higher notes of said synths become much more noticeable. It's as if they took a track from Amber and gave it an insanely groovy quality, and I like it. I will say though, the structure itself can be a bit too linear for me at times, but the fact Outerker took the time to keep listeners like me on my toes by including a little more interesting elements to spice up the layering is very commendable. Compared to some other tracks, I don't feel as though I'd have a lot to comment on due to its simplicity, but this is a great track from this unique duo that is a big reason why I dig with Tri-Repeate's versatility. The production is great, the synths and percussion are mixed in nicely, and the length helps justify this track's sparseness, which has me eager to come back to this more and more, even after this video. Very good stuff.
Number 31, Atlas in Motion, Burgundy.
Okay, for this next one, I'm about to hit you with a 180 because we're going from meticulously detailed IDM production to something that is more or less the complete opposite of that. Atlas in Motion was a name that initially seemed familiar to me when this one got voted in, and after doing some research, I realized that his music has also made an appearance on this channel before. I remember when someone sent in his Floating Your Boat assisted single from 2016, Broken, back in episode 2 of MSR, but under the name Atlas. And looking back on it, I still think that one's really freaking great to this day. The problem was, I haven't checked out his other stuff beyond this one song until now, and after delving into his stuff, I can say that he has a pretty nice sense of blending alternative, pop, orchestral, and electronic elements that, to me, give off quite a similar vibe to A Cloudy Sky, which is definitely a compliment. Honestly though, I feel the absolute best he has to offer can be found in his late 2010s material, particularly his Perpetually album from 2018, which was very nicely cohesive in its structure and had great production to not only back up each of the track's lyrics, but also to perfectly showcase his knack for combining those aforementioned styles to a T. It's a really solid album. However, it wasn't until nearly a year later that he released his 2019 single, Burgundy, and to tell you what I thought about it, I also think this is equally as great as most of these tracks on Perpetually. I'd even go as far as to say that it would probably be my favorite song on that album had it made the cut, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense to say because this track was obviously not released in 2018. But my argument is that this track sounds to me like he's perfected this style a bit more to a place where that same passion and effort he had for that project has also shown through on this non-album single. I'm loving the dynamics right off the bat, as the way the pads taking up the first 40 seconds of it are going into these soft and meditative pianos makes for an already pleasing beginning. And Atlas sounds pretty much in place with these pianos acting as the ideal canvas for the low tone of his voice. I also like the way the pads come back a little later on, along with the inclusion of a pumping kick drum and some string sections that make lyrics like "Don't worry about me any longer, my love, it's a cut, I need you, but you're out there" sound like they mean a lot to the artist. Also, speaking of the lyrics, they don't provide much in the way of profundity on its face, but there's something about the way he repeats this verse that gives a whole set of nuances to the stellar production itself, which has me appreciating it more than I thought I was going into it. All of these things alone would still be solid at its peak, but what comes after that really does up the ante a touch and pushes it gracefully into great territory. Firstly, you get Atlas singing these last two lines through these soulful vocoders that immediately remind me of Alexander Panos, and then you get this beautifully bombastic climax at around the 4-minute mark or so, and that has me thinking, oh yeah, now that's what I'm talking about. This is the kind of part that I was really hoping for in a song like this, and once that drop came in, it just absolutely hit in such a good way. And the pads fading out at the end were the perfect finishing touch for this type of track as well. An absolute stunner of an ending, I cannot lie. Despite all of that, I think this has been done way better on similar sounding songs, like Healy Off by A Cloudy Sky, or if you want to look for an even earlier comparison, Sea of Voices by Porter Robinson, as I feel both of these tracks just hit even harder in terms of production, chord progressions, dynamics, or in the case of Sea of Voices, stronger lyricism. But this track specifically is, again, great on its own merits, that also slightly improves upon what he delivered on Perpetually. If you're looking to get into some uplifting and hard-hitting electronic music with an alternative and orchestral undertone, along with an overlying sense of emotional highs, I wouldn't mind pointing to this as a nice preliminary excursion for getting into this sort of stuff. Check it out.
Number 30, Marumari, Circles.
Alright, back to the IDM stuff again. For my third route pick, we'll be taking a look at this Albany, New York-based electronic duo consisting of Josh and Sasha Precisen, who apparently have amassed quite a span of subgenres under their belt. Going from IDM, of course, to hip-hop, to glitch, to ambient, to downtempo, which, yeah, all of these descriptors very much have me intrigued on the spot. What's also interesting is that they've released 6 mainline albums, but not all of them are easily available. While Ballad of the Round Ball, The Wolf's Hollow, Super Mogadon, and Pegasus can be available to listen to on streaming platforms, Story of the Heavens can only be free to listen to via unofficial YouTube uploads, and 4876 is straight up nowhere to be found at all. Lucky for us, this next track, Circles, does happen to be from Ballad of the Round Ball, and this one's a delightful first impression of those previously stated styles that they have explored all in this nearly 4-minute barrage of hard-hitting IDM percussion and reversed-sounding synths. And yeah, speaking of the synths, I love how they have some sort of otherworldly grace and atmosphere to them despite their minimality. And the slight distortion slash fuzziness those synths have somehow included a uniquely likable characteristic that I can't really put my finger on. It's as if the rough edges they have make the track stand out in an interesting way. And the percussion that this cut brings to the table is equally as meticulous as C/Pac. But the way the percussion on this track felt more sporadic was what made it get a bit of the upper hand for me. Not only do I really like how downtempo this glitchy percussion sounds, but it also does a very good job of working well with set synths by means of operating on just the right amount of volume with them, while also allowing them room to breathe at some points as well, particularly in the middle and end of it where either a little bit of the percussion stays in or gets cut off altogether. And I'll say, the result of this combination is lovely as all heck, as that evokes a little more of the same charm I get from Mike Paradina's first couple of Music albums. Seriously, this sounds like something that would feel at home with Tango Invective, an album that's also very much about colliding mood-brightening synths and irresistible IDM grooves to generate a scattershot yet cohesive effort. And that's what I'm getting at with this standalone track as well, even if it's not exactly up to the same degree. I haven't checked out Marumari's other stuff outside of this one getting sent in, but I think this might seal the deal and that I should check out more from them, because if their other stuff sounds just as fun as this one, then consider me keeping tabs on this duo moving forward.
Number 29, Primal Scream, Come Together, Farley Mix.
I guess it seems as though we're going in a pattern here. Once again, we've gone from hyper-detailed IDM material to more carefree and playful stuff. But this time, it's not in the way that you'd expect. So, Primal Scream. They're a band whose experimentation is pretty remarkable. And if there's one notable release you might already know them for, it's their third album from 1991, Screamadelica. Inspired by the emerging house scene and associated drugs such as LSD, this record saw them ditching the primarily indie rock sound of their first 2 albums in favor of venturing through other genres like alternative dance, dance rock, folk, gospel, and even acid house, along with their already established neo-psychedelia sound. I'll also confess with this one being the only Primal Scream album I've listened to in full. The first 2 albums I've only skimmed through to get a general idea of their earlier sound, but I heavily agree with the majority on this being a great album across the board. Right from when I first listened to this thing, I could immediately see why this is still considered a 90s classic. Not only are the colorful instrumentals on here very fun to hear, as is with the sampling, but the way they step out of their comfort zone by incorporating elements of completely different genres to what they were used to prior to this album is imaginative as all hell. Loaded, Moving On Up, Don't Fight It, Feel It. So many insanely fun moments on this thing, and Come Together Farley Mix is definitely not one to exclude from the list of highlights. You're greeted with angelic gospel choirs as soon as this track starts, telling the listener to, well, come together, which paints the perfect picture for what you're about to get yourself into, and these choirs being paired with Martin Duffy's piano playing really do scream, no pun intended, gospel to me. And these things do have me hooked into it right away. The lyrics are nothing too complex, just a repetition of the narrator wanting some lover to kiss him and to take some drugs with him in the verses, as well as the proclamation of being free and begging to be touched in the choruses, but those lyrics are truly helped by the gentle vocals of Bobby Gillespie, as well as some lovely guitars from Andrew Ines and Robert Young, great drumming from Philip Toby Tomanoff, and wonderful sounding trumpets that further add in a lot of exuberance while also contributing to this album's trippy atmosphere very well. If you think the choir continuously repeating the Come Together lines over and over again in the second half would be a big detractor from my enjoyment of this song, then you would be sorely mistaken. In the case of Come Together Farley Mix, that sort of verbosity sounds like it should be a bit too mind-numbing for its own good, but it isn't, as that makes me feel like the song was truly meant to go on for all of eternity, and honestly, with how lively and energetic this thing sounds, I wouldn't mind this going on a bit longer either. This may rank at number 29 out of 50 songs, but in terms of how much joy and happiness this one brings me, this would be way higher up. In a year where everything has gone to shit so far, this is one track that I'm very happy to not only have around for more times to come, but also to have sat down and analyzed for you guys. Great track for sure. Go give this a spin.
Number 28, Camellia, Lewin of Kelchar.
Alright, time for raw pick number 4. If you need the energy to get cranked all the way up to 11, don't you worry, because Tokyo, Japan-based producer Camellia has got you covered. They're mostly well known for their distinctive takes on a myriad of styles like dubstep, speedcore, drum step, and possibly even more. They're also a fan favorite in a lot of submission ranking videos from other YouTubers in particular, but I never really got exposed to their music by means of seeing that type of content first. The track that introduced me to Camellia was Speedrun from 2017, which I first heard in a video from a couple years ago that was basically a showcase of different subgenres of dubstep, and I think that track is great, by the way. In terms of standalone tracks, I haven't listened to much of theirs outside of Speedrun, but as far as full-length albums go, there's only one that I've heard in full, and that's 2019's Black Magic Blazing. What caught my attention here beforehand was not just the nice artwork, but also the interesting concept of this being focused on darkness and black magic, hence the name, and I thought it was really solid stuff. While I can't say some tracks on this record were for me, what made it enjoyable was the variety that each of these tracks displayed, encompassing genres such as hardcore techno, hardstyle, neurofunk, and bass house, along with their trademark dubstep and speedcore tendencies. Alongside that, I also really like how all 14 tracks actually stick to these darkness and black magic themes, which gave even my least favorite tracks on the album a whole ton of character at least. And Lewin of Kelchar was definitely one that stood out to me as a great capture of both the sound of this record and also what Camellia is truly capable of in terms of their notable experimentation and styles. Almost immediately, I am a big fan of the Celtic/medieval vibes this one gives off, as evident at the start where we're getting some sleigh bells, bongos, lutes, and a prominent bagpipe lead that sounds exciting to me. It's kind of like setting the stage for some medieval-themed rhythm game or something. This next section that all these things progress into is really cool too, where we're getting these commanding synths and snare drum rolls and a new lead that all sound just as memorable as before. And that's the moment where I'm just like, yeah, we're really going on an adventure with this one. Also, good golly gee, the drops paying off these buildups are so much fun, and like, how the fuck do I even describe them? All of these drops sound absolutely crazy, yet I can get a good hold of each and every one of them. That first drop is where we're getting that typical Camellia speedcore drop that we all love them for, with thumping sirenish bass lines being thrown at us like it's nothing new, and man, don't even get me started on that bro step switch up. I also love how that bagpipe melody from earlier reinforces itself in some parts of the track to further emphasize those medieval vibes. Furthermore, that glitchy drop 2 minutes in is great and maybe my favorite drop in this track. That chord progression a minute after that sounds very video game OST-esque in the best possible way and makes me think that I can do a lot of impossible tasks to the point of delusion, especially with those pianos. And the rapping vocals fit so well with this track's euphoric personality, even when they're being suffocated in the mix, thus making them sound unintelligible to me. I'm so glad I was nice enough to handpick this one though, so I can have an opportunity to talk about how insanely fun and unique their sound design is. And this is a great track overall that continues to get better and better the more times I hear it.
Number 27, Fatboy Slim, right here, right now.
Ah, yes, it's about time I got a chance to talk about this guy. If you're at all familiar with Big Beat, then there's a good chance you might be aware of Fatboy Slim, real name Norman Cook, an English musician and DJ who helped popularize the genre in the mid to late 90s with a string of very iconic songs that appeared on his sophomore album from 1998, You've Come a Long Way Baby, which not only became certified platinum, but also made appearances on a whopping 31 weekly and year-end charts worldwide, peaking at number 1 on 5 of them. And yes, this is quite easily my favorite album from Fatboy Slim, and as such, I'm also pretty much in line with its critical and fan acclaim. Technically speaking, Halfway Between the Gutter and the Stars does come close to this, but in my eyes, I don't think there's a better demonstration of his incredible knack for creating some bangers in this genre's veins than on this here album, which could be a huge contender for the title of the quintessential Big Beat album, alongside such similar records as The Prodigy's The Fat of the Land and The Crystal Method's Vegas, which both came out a year prior, but I digress. From Praise You to Gangster Tripping to especially the Rockefeller Skank, Fatboy Slim uses his great production abilities to bring life to the older songs that he's sampling from to create a convivial and exhilarating listening experience. And the opening track, Right Here, Right Now, is a big example of how fun this album can be. This track starts with a sampling of some string melodies courtesy of Ashes to Rain and I by the James Gang, which eventually becomes the main foundation of the instrumental later on. And the filter that gets applied to them throughout the first 30 seconds of this track sounds pretty cool, especially when they get layered up with some light percussion shortly after. Then a minute in, we get this build up with the prominently used right here, right now phrase, which is sampled from the 1995 movie Strange Days, and the way it's layered up with a looped version of the first half of the aforementioned shrink sample is genuinely so hype, I swear. It's honestly such an exciting part of the song that it always has me eager to hear what the payoff to it might be every time this track has my undivided attention. And what do you know? The payoff is perfect. This mixture of the strings and the Big Beat production is pretty flavorful all things considered, which puts a nice grin on my face every time that part shows up, especially when it eventually gets layered up with the Waking Up to Find Your Love's Not Real lyric, which immediately becomes inescapable for my brain once I hear it. However, that's pretty much all there is to it for the main bulk of this track, as nothing much changes throughout the majority of it aside from this one part at the 320 mark where the strings get cut out entirely, but it also doesn't feel nearly as overly long as one might expect. Much like with most tracks on You've Come a Long Way Baby, Fatboy Slim finds ways to make every part of Right Here, Right Now as engaging and worthwhile as possible. Also, as a bonus, at the conclusion of the album version of this track, there's this fun outro skit, which samples a radio call between talk show host Bradley J and an anonymous caller in the early 90s, and it makes for a really nice segue into the Rockefeller Skank by the end. I know I've probably talked way too much about a song that sounds fairly simplistic on a compositional level, so I'll conclude this segment by saying that this track is so much fun to put on if you're in the mood for some dang good Big Beat material. What can I say? This really bangs, y'all.
Number 26, DJ Sabrina the Teenage DJ, Charmed.
I mean, yeah, why not just let the energy keep on thriving? And with my 5th raw pick too, which just so happens to be from none other than DJ Sabrina the Teenage DJ, an electronic producer who has a really creative name, being a little nod to Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Her music also mainly leans more on the outsider house and plunderphonic side of things, and I gotta say, her output has mostly been pretty enjoyable. Despite her albums being so terrifyingly long, she's proven time and time again that her colorful and nostalgic visions on this kind of sound are nothing short of a joy to listen to on the surface, even if it's mostly only in a vacuum. I say that because my thing with DJ Sabrina albums is that they are best digestible in separate parts and are not meant to be listened to all in one sitting. I think I recall hearing Destiny around the time it came out and felt like taking a break in between He's My Baby and Out of Nothing. And even though that album is absolutely great in my eyes and I still personally stand by that being her best effort, it can occasionally be a teeny bit irritating listening to the same sound over and over again, especially throughout the span of a whopping 4 hours. However, to me anyway, her albums usually give off this energy of being at the club for hours and hours on end and making you feel like staying there for that long without any exhaustion, so it can definitely work in that sense too. Especially on her 2020 album Charmed, which is pretty much just what we're accustomed to from her. It's a solid record that sees her conjuring up songs in that same house/plunderphonics formula throughout a 3-hour time span. But it also resulted in loads of gems here, some of which are even among my favorites in her catalog, and the title track totally fits that mold because, true to its name, it sounds pretty charming. Right from when it starts, it has a clear sense of generating some danceable grooves, as I like how it starts in a UK garage kind of fashion for a short moment, before diving head first into that Chicago house-ish sound that then stays for the rest of its 6-minute run. Also, the production is great all around, as the synths and guitars bounce so well off of each other to create one heck of a summer vibe that sounds unlike anything else on this ranking, as is with a few additional sound effects that further make the listening experience all the more fun. And yeah, the lyrics and or vocal samples make all those summer vibes even better, especially with that I Feel the Way I Do hook, which is just as catchy as the Right Here Right Now sample from the previous track I talked about. The verses here are also well intentioned too, and sure, you can argue the lyrics are nothing more than your typical love song about how charmed he feels about the relationship he has with some romantic partner and how his life felt so tragic before he met her, but damn, those verses don't feel like they're out of place with the tone of this song at all. I think the autotune that gets implemented in his voice sounds perfect with the kind of track Sabrina is going for. And I love how the beats sound a bit quieter in some parts too in order for those vocals to shine through. Really great dynamics there. Also, I don't know what it is about that vocal sample at the 3:24 mark, but it's reminding me of the Avalanches in absolutely the best way. Especially when it goes through some kind of turntable effect at one part as well. Definitely giving Frontier Psychiatrist vibes right there. Lastly, the phone call in this makes for a nice little inclusion too, and even though it sounds a touch overpowered, it only lasts for a short moment to where I don't mind its place here. But yeah, I don't know if I'd be up to talking about another track from DJ Sabrina, because I feel like I'm just going to repeat everything I said here production-wise. And also, as mentioned before, her albums are so damn long, and as such, there's only so much stuff from her to dive into. Not really discouraging you guys from suggesting any more tracks from her, I'm just saying. But the track itself is really great. And I hope that all this talk about it has convinced you to have a gander at her very interesting sound.
Number 25, The Police, Roxanne.
Alright, we are now officially halfway done with this ranking, so congrats to anyone who has made it this far. And better yet, we are starting the second half off by temporarily taking a little break from the electronic stuff with my 6th Rob pick, two Rob picks back to back, love to see it, which is a song from The Police, a band who admittedly falls in this weird category of listening to them more for a few select individual tracks and less for the albums themselves. I've done very brief reviews on Darkness and Message in a Bottle in the final episode of Monthly Submission Rankings. And of course, I'm very familiar with their mega iconic hit, Every Breath You Take, which was later interpolated by a certain rapper whose name we don't ever utter on this channel. Outside of those, I haven't carved out the time to listen to their albums in full yet, but this next track from their Outlandos d'Amor album from 1978 is one of the reasons why I'd like to do a deep dive into all 5 of their albums someday. And given my thoughts on those first 2 songs I've mentioned, don't be surprised when I say that Roxanne is also great and another one of their finest tracks yet. Immediately after hearing this, I can tell all the members of the band who are having so much fun, as I'm really loving this reggae rock style they've put on here, which is definitely helped by some lively guitars coming from Andy Summers, Stuart Copeland's impeccably groovy drumming, and incredible bass work and vocals from Sting. And yeah, this is home to one of his best vocal performances for sure. What I love about his voice in this song is that he can go up into this high mixed/belty range in his voice without sounding like he's straining himself. And it's always satisfying to me when singers like him can hit those notes like it's nothing, especially when he does a little growl the second time he goes into that pre-chorus. And his harmonies are also so well done on this energetic and kick-ass hook, where he sounds very far from checked out here. The whole song though, but this part especially. Also, there's this noticeable mishap in the intro where Sting accidentally sat on a piano during this song's recording and subsequently laughing soon after, and it's pretty hilarious how they've collectively decided to mix these sounds in for the shits and giggles, which unintentionally made the track in a good way and revealed a bit of an authentic side to the band that I haven't heard them pull off before, but I really like it. And we haven't even gotten into the lyrics yet, which have a well-written premise where Sting is convincing this Roxanne person to change her ways for the better in order to keep pursuing the relationship. As evident in the first verse where he tells her that she doesn't have to live her life walking around as a prostitute anymore in the form of the line, "You don't have to put on the red light," which is also stated in the pre-chorus and hook. In the second verse, he then tells her that he's made up his mind about being with Roxanne because he still loves her, along with making the promise to not talk down to her or treat her like an object, and also showing his disapproval of her sleeping with other men. As someone who currently doesn't have a romantic partner, I'm not one to relate to these lyrics in a strong manner, but I think the dichotomy of these desperate lyrics and this upbeat reggae rock instrumental really makes for another example of this track's commendable willingness and authenticity that doesn't sound even the least like the band is trying to be actively sleazy to the listener. And that's just great. I think this is definitely worth hearing if you're looking into this band for the first time, and like I've said before, hopefully this will be the one to finally make me check out more of their songs too.
Number 24, 808 State, 10x10.
Next up, we have another artist that I've covered in a 2024 Robert's Recharged Mega Collabs episode as well, ZZT Records' very own 808 State. A very influential group in the UK's acid house scene that currently consists of Graham Massey as the sole remaining member, and also formerly consisted of Andy Barker, Gerald Simpson, Martin Price, and Darren Partington. And oh boy, I am so excited to shed light on this group again, because they are one of my favorite electronic artists that I've discovered this decade. Their infectious touches on acid house, techno, synth pop, jungle, and more were something that I instantly fell in love with. Their 80s and 90s output in particular were and still are proof of this group's most elite handling on those styles, and are important assets to make that scene as fruitful and flourishing as it could be. And their fourth studio album, Gorgeous, is one example of them being at their best when it comes to their bread and butter, making some damn good hooks and grooves along with exuding that feeling of having a good time. Something in common with some of these other electronic submissions that I've already covered in this video. In contrast to New Build, 90, and XL, which provided the group's promising and innovative earlier takes on acid house, Gorgeous saw them going for a more vibrant approach to their sound, while also starting to incorporate takes on jungle, and this kind of experimentation was something that they would later go on another level with on Don Solaris in the mid-90s. But this is still an absolutely great and borderline refreshing record with bangers upon bangers galore. And 10x10 has always been a wonderful moment on the album each time I've put this on. The pianos at the start sound awesome and are telling of what's to come, and my god, I love this chord progression. Sorry for going music theory mode here, but I'm gonna say it anyway. The only note differentiating these chords may be the third and nothing else, but this movement from F sharp 7 sus4 to F sharp 7 to F sharp minor 7 to F sharp 7 is so good. I can't even describe it. It just has me pumped up like nobody's business. And the layering in this opening part of the song too is great, where we then see them get paired with some clapping and these wonderful vocals telling you to raise the feeling. Also gotta love the harmonies building up on the vocals as well. A little later on, we get this cool synth bass as well as some diving laser-ish sound effects being thrown in here, and we even get what I describe as the actual hook, telling the listener to not only raise the feeling, but also to raise it 10 to... fucking voice crack, man. Telling the listener to not only raise the feeling, but also to raise it 10x10. All this builds up into this smashing middle section, where we get this awesome bass line alongside some banging jungle production to boot, and this shit really got me headbanging till Kingdom Come. What an absolute jam! And the bass and electric guitars also fit well with this production, especially that last one where it sounds like it's being sampled from some 70s song or something, and I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Also gonna like that sample at the end. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10. But yeah, this track may be only 3.5 minutes long, but man does it pack one hell of a punch or what. It's a great one for damn sure, and it's still one of my go-to tracks from them for when I need to be in a better mood. This, along with Pacific 202, In Your Face, and Jerusa Hat, is among some of the best they have to offer, and I'll be looking forward to talking about them again in the future, whenever that may be.
Number 23, Lilybug, Lighthouse.
Back to the small artist, and this time we have Lilybug, another artist that blends electronic music in with rock/orchestral aesthetics, pretty much in the same vein as A Cloudy Sky and Atlas in Motion. And even if the only thing I've heard was 2024's From the Sea to the Stars, I still really liked what I've heard from her. She's also released stuff on the record label Neoluminum, so I guess that'll convince me to check more of her stuff out. Anyways, this album was sort of what I was envisioning based on that cover. I was expecting that same mid-tempo, shoegaze, pop-y, hybrid kind of sound that those two artists have pulled off before, and it delivered on that front, but it also had a bit of variety to it, with tracks like Everything and Through Every Broken Bone exploring other genres that haven't been touched on, while also feeling at home with its storyline and the utmost cinematic tone of it all. That's not to say the rest of the tracks didn't have their moments, because I pretty much enjoyed all of them equally, and the 6th-track Lighthouse was certainly no exception. With this being the longest at a little over 6.5 minutes, it's obviously acting as some sort of centerpiece to From the Sea, and it did its job perfectly. The piano chords contrasting with some river sounds and a clave made for an effectively chill atmosphere, providing such a promising beginning. And I love the way it's continuously building up with some more nature-like percussion, elegant pads, beautiful strings, and dramatic sounding orchestral drums to further amp up my interest in where this could go. And it went into the direction of some very interesting metaphorical lyricism that I think contributes well to this record's cohesion. To me, this is reading off as a song where the narrator is talking about some girl and how she wants to find what's missing in the ocean. And I feel like this could work with multiple different scenarios and or interpretations depending on the person. Like, maybe a part of her went missing and she wants to take the time to find herself. Don't quote me on that, but yeah, I think these lyrics were written very thoughtfully and absolutely help with this song's pacing. Also, sorry if this sounds like a dumb statement, but I don't know if Lillybug herself sang on this track, but if that's the case, I'll say this as well. I love the effect on her delicate vocals, as it gives off vibes similar to that of almost any track from Porter Robinson's Nurture, like Musician, Something Comforting, Mirror, etc. But given that this is a track that technically sounds akin to Burgundy from early in the video, there's always bound to be a huge, gargantuan, and epic climax somewhere. And yeah, big surprise, there's definitely one here too. And I'm not one to complain either, because it outright carries the rest of this tune. Those deafening pads overscoring those imposing drums is a combination that, when it's done right, is going to be something that I'll be a sucker for. And my goodness, this drop sounds even more impactful than on Burgundy's drop, and I totally love it for that, especially when the rhythm of the drumming switches up a bit later on. Overall, this track is the best showcase of both what From the Sea is all about, and of her invigorating sound to boot. And for that, this is definitely one to seek out if you're willing to get into explosive and uplifting electronic soundscapes. Great stuff.
Number 22, Kelly Lee Owens, Time To.
For my 7th drop pick, here comes another artist whose work I'm stoked to go a little more in depth with, Kelly Lee Owens. Her slices of techno, ambient, drone, and dream pop are something that I'm totally fascinated with, as the self-titled debut showed a very unique and atmospheric take on those styles that have earned her a bunch of critical acclaim. Meanwhile, in her song captured an exciting expansion on her sound by also dabbling with downtempo and tech house, and LPA upped the scope of her production significantly by providing a bit of an IDM edge to it in order to focus on even more spacious, atmospheric, and drone-y productions. And that effort resulted in me loving it enough to put it on my top 50 albums of 2022, marking it as my 7th favorite to come out of that year. However, Dream State is technically a bit of an outlier in her discography, as it sees her strictly sticking to tech house / deep house formulas to make the hooks be just as much in the limelight as the production itself. But even with a lot of these tracks mostly evoking that same sound, I think this is still on par with LPA as the best record she's put out. Sound design wise, this album may be linear in nature, but those beautifully melodic hooks really do help make the production on a lot of these tracks soar. Pretty much the same deal I have with Romy's Midair these days. This has resulted in quite the bops we have here, one of them being Time To, which actually goes for a more UK garage sort of approach, pulling down to the rhythm of these beats. And yeah, this is just as stunning as everything else on the album. To me, the lyrics and the verses seem to be about self-discovery and pushing away others that may be making this journey through life all the more difficult. But in the chorus, she's thankful for what she really needed and not what she got. Nothing much more beyond that, but her down-to-earth delivery to them was something that makes the song shine, especially with her soft and breathy vocals that help generate a very mesmerizing quality to the music itself. And the production is fantastic too, as the soothing pads permeating throughout this whole track collide with her vocals so seamlessly, as they alone also contribute to the hypnotic sound of it without fail. Furthermore, the synth melodies are pretty memorable, the minimal breaks sound satisfying and are mixed in very well with the aforementioned UK garage production. The way that production switches up at the end by going for a more housey kind of rhythm sounds really cool. And quickly going back to her vocals, I also love the way she's singing random melodies in the middle of the song too, to also add on to this track's alluringly well-crafted atmosphere. Don't know if I have much more to say about it because of its simplicity, but this is great stuff all around that not only shows Kelly's incredible capabilities as an electronic producer and vocalist, but also her inclination to go for an entirely new direction in order to keep her sound fresh. And I can say it absolutely paid off for her, as is with many other tracks from Dream State. Check it out.
Number 21, Danny Breaks, Beat Biter.
What I love about making videos of this caliber is discovering artists with a great sense of blending two disparate musical ideals and churning out something that sounds completely their own. And fortunately, I get to review a track from an artist that checks this box indeed. Meet Danny Breaks, real name Daniel Whitted, a British drum and bass DJ who also founded his own record label in 1994, Drop-In Science, which has been inactive for over 2 decades now. He's also released 6 mainline albums, and his sophomore effort, Vibrations, ain't a bad one to start with, I'll tell you that much. Upon listening to it in preparation for the segment, I was impressed with the way he infused samples of what sounded like songs from the 1950s in with hip-hop and jungle production. That, coupled with some kick-ass sci-fi elements and seamless transitions, made it have such a timelessly futuristic quality that was so well executed in the grand scheme of sample-based music of this kind, especially for 2002 standards. Despite its 12-track roster and all of them going for that same idea of conjuring up this quirky fusion, this album never felt like it was running together, and all the tracks felt like they each had their own identity apart from each other, while also contributing to its creative ideas. And Beatbiter caps off this album's first half by producing a 6-minute journey that captures some of its best qualities to a T. And yeah, this one's just damn near fantastic, I am so certain. The way it starts with a sample of some mysterious woodwinds and guitars contrasting with a simple hi-hat rhythm was actually pretty effective in pulling me into that old-timey atmosphere. And it's certainly helped by the punchy jungle production of this play that is groovy as heck and does a great job of providing a sense of forward momentum, along with, again, some very interesting sci-fi sound effects that make me feel like I'm in some sort of parallel universe where everything I look at depicts an old western film whose main characters are extraterrestrial beings dressed up as cowboys. A minute and a half in is where this track truly starts to shake up, with the melody being played by an instrument that kinda sounds like a theremin for some reason, or I could be wrong, I kinda suck at naming things sometimes, and a vibraphone melody that also gets reversed in some parts too to evoke that sensation of a swell. And it's a great swell, as it totally adds a ton of drama and passion to this track. And I also love that earthy sub-bass with how full it sounds, and how it incorporates a lot of impact to the mix without overpowering all the other elements that make this track worth investing in. After some more sci-fi sound effect freakouts, as well as a repetition of the samples we had before, we get a look at this album's hip-hop influences coming through 4 minutes in, and this hip-hop beat works wonders for these samples, especially with the inclusion of a chopped up and scratchy rapping vocal that exudes a very infectious source of energy similar to that of projects like DJ Shadow's Introducing. And the way this all transitions back into the jungle stuff is absolutely effortless, gratifying even. All in all, I can definitely say that this track is a must listen that very nicely shows this artist's ability to combine two things that shouldn't go together on paper and turn them into something uniquely beautiful and ear-catching with its impeccable sonic environment. Jazz and jungle forever, y'all.
Number 20, Aphex Twin, Didgeridoo.
Well, another submission-related video, another track from the one and only Richard D. James. Unlike a lot of these artists here, I'm sure I don't need to go on a huge spiel as to who this guy is. You know, a legendary and influential pioneer in genres like ambient, IDM, techno, drill and bass and jungle, whose studio album output under the Aphex Twin name is still iconic to this day. He also has went by many pseudonyms, and I even talked about Nightmare 1 from his AFX alias in MSR26, and also a few of his other Aphex Twin tracks in previous episodes of that series. But something I haven't done yet on this channel is diving into a track from his EPs under that name. And in the case of Didgeridoo, this appeared in the 1992 EP of the same name, which I thought was a nice slice of acid techno and breakbeat that totally sounds a bit of a far cry from what he did on 85 to 92 later that year, where that consisted of ambient techno flourishes that put a greater emphasis on creating a lot of space as well as a relaxing atmosphere. Didgeridoo is a lot heavier in comparison, being characterized by a lot of rough breakbeats, distorted percussion, and squelchy bass lines. And even if this isn't as good as 85 to 92, and I can't say it expanded my music taste to the same extent as that project, it doesn't stop me from saying that this EP is still fun for what it is, with all these tracks being pretty good to great, all things considered. With that being said, the opening title track is an absolute banger, and is unashamedly where I think the peak of this specific project lies. I nearly neglected to mention that this also kicks off his 1994 Classics compilation, and man, what a way to start that off too, with that striking bass line going so off and reflecting these backing breakbeats so sublimely to provide that perfect boost of energy that I appreciate in tracks of this style, especially his 90s material. Also, RDJ apparently didn't sample an actual didgeridoo on here, as according to the Wikipedia article on the EP, he instead, quote, spent 3 days creating an electronic simulacrum, end quote, which I'm assuming is some sort of synth modulator or something? I don't know, I'm nowhere near a super in-depth insider on how he produces his tracks by any means, but I will say, the fact that he manipulated that bass to make it sound like one is a stroke of brilliance all on its own, and is another reason why he's a master of what he does. If you told me that the foundation for this track was a sample of an actual didgeridoo being filtered throughout, and not some bass being disguised as one, you would have had me fooled. And I certainly thought that when I first came across this a couple years ago. On top of that, this one is also 7 minutes long despite not having that much going for it, but it doesn't really feel like it either. It almost feels like 4 with how quickly this one zips by, and how RDJ throws in a few more elements to keep me interested throughout its runtime. The woo sample, as well as some bird sounds, also feels in place with the tone of this track. And it's sort of giving out vibes that I can only describe as Australian Aboriginal music on acid for some reason. I can't pinpoint why, but this can be attributed to, again, the didgeridoo-like bassline, I mean, the didgeridoo is arguably the most vital instrument for that style of music, so I can't be the only one who thinks about that whenever I hear this track. Finally, the additional banging toppers that get thrown in along with the already existing breakbeats sound beyond cool, and they, in turn, energize this track even further to have me come back to this one more and more and more. And all this generates the result of not just another one of RDJ's best tracks, but also one that I think would be a big crowd pleaser in a live setting. I mean, there's also a live version tacked onto the end of Classics where he performed it in Cornwall in 1990, and RDJ himself has performed it more since, with the most recent one I could find being at the Door Festival in Belgium in 2023. But yeah, at the end of the day, Aphex Twin is Aphex Twin, which is to say, this track is absolutely great from front to back. Enough said.
Number 19, A Cloudy Sky, Miss.
I have already mentioned the name of this next artist quite a few times when I was doing the Atlas in Motion and Lilybug segments, so it was only inevitable that we bump into him at some point. Not that I'm complaining though, because we've got something special on our hands, everyone. Anyways, it's been a while since I've last covered or merely even showcased A Cloudy Sky on this channel. An unbelievably talented producer known for mixing shoegaze and future bass-ish elements to create grand, impeccable, and resonant narrative soundscapes. And his 5-album discography has garnered a lot of praise over the years, which is easy to see why, because not only has there never been a truly low point in this catalog, but it's also interesting how his sound has progressed and evolved throughout each album too. Something I always love to hear in any artist's body of work, let alone anyone that has developed a style as grandiose as his. A Place Where Mountains Hide from 2019 was a primarily melodic dubstep and mid-tempo bass record with only a few isolated instances of the direction he wanted to go in later on. Blood Rushing Like Current Through a Power Line from 2021 was a beautiful, personal first impression of the potential that this clever fusion had. And What Do You Want from 2022 successfully bridged the gap between the styles he developed then and the next evolution of his music while also living up to the quality of Blood Rushing. However, There Must Be Something Here from 2024 was a 180 in that all the rock influences became much more of the main focus than the electronic elements. With its most recent album, This Won't Be the Last Time, only furthering this idea while also focusing even more on writing deep and thoughtful lyrical content. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. These two may sound a bit different compared to his other 3 albums, but both of them have shown off A Cloudy Sky's strengths as a producer and songwriter very well. And Miss, the third and final pre-album single So This Won't Be the Last Time, is certainly evident of that, because this is one of his best and catchiest tracks thus far. As the second track off of TWBTLT, it does a great job of keeping the ball rolling with this album's uplifting production features and skillful thematic throughline. The production and dynamics of this one are also just as good as usual, as I love how soft it gets at the intro, verses, and bridge, with the acoustic guitar mostly taking up these parts, and then gets explosive every time the chorus hits, where we get some distorted electric pianos gelling well with the plodding but intense drumming that just wholeheartedly soar. It's genuinely beautiful. Other things about the song I dig include the occasional laser sound sprinkled throughout, the additional electric guitar-like melodies that happen before them, the little synth stabs that appear whenever those huge guitars come in during the choruses, and A Cloudy Sky singing, which also undoubtedly fits with this track like a perfectly sized tuxedo. I wouldn't call him the best singer in the world or anything, and I'll admit that the production overwhelms his vocals so much to the point where I don't understand what he's singing most of the time unless I look up the lyrics, but that's a really minute complaint in the grander scheme of everything when the sound design is this on point. He also has a very nice tone, and I greatly appreciate his soft delivery backing up his vocals. All of these gorgeous production aspects are fine and dandy enough, but the other big main thing about it that made me put it so high on this ranking are the lyrics, that seem to be about some kind of relationship, and they amplify my enjoyment of this one even more, and contribute so well to this whole album's mesmerizing imagery, with the verses being especially noticeable about this sense of imagery. I think the lyric that stood out to me the most is the first verse. I don't know what it is about that, but something about digging holes that kind of represent trials and tribulations of some sort kind of touched me. The choruses, on the other hand, see him begging his friend or partner to pretend to care, and they're not only pretty memorable and catchy, but also work as well executed payoffs to the delicate build-ups that were provided in the verses, proving how awesome the juxtaposition of the lyrics and dynamics is. And I also really like the bridge about him seeing what he was like in his dreams, as I see that as being pretty advantageous of this track's lyrical details. As an artist, A Cloudy Sky continues to get better with every project and with each individual song he releases, and this song is definitely worth hearing for longtime fans of him, as well as anyone new to his music. It's my favorite song on his new album, and I don't think that'll be changing anytime soon.
Number 18, Passion Pit, Sleepyhead.
Next on the docket is Passion Pit. a band known for their really exciting and uplifting visions on indie-tronica and synthpop, and it solely consists of Michael Angelakos as its primary recording member, along with these guys as live musicians. And yeah, I'm psyched to talk about something from them for the first time, because for the most part, I'm quite a fan of what they had to offer. And their 2009 debut album Manners remains a very promising start to their mainline album catalog that pretty much separated them as a unique act in this genre, and one of the most creative to have come out of the tail end of the aughts. Featuring such serious bops as Little Secrets and The Reeling, this is a superb and adventurous collection of 11 tracks with incredibly welcoming moods and textures, great songwriting, and infectious hooks that make you want to get up and dance the night away, no more no less. And Sleepyhead, which originally appeared on their 2008 EP Chunk of Change, is nothing short of great too. As a side note, I'll only be talking about the original Chunk of Change version of the song and not the one remastered for Manners, since that's the version I'm more used to, even if it's virtually not that vast of a difference. And I'll be sure to add in a rule to specify which version of a song you want me to cover when submissions for my next grab bag open, but I digress. Let's talk about the song now. To start, this song has been confirmed by Angelakos himself to be about a breakup stemming from his ex's disapproval of him sleeping in too much, and some lines in the verses are doing little nods to well-known nursery rhymes, with "You are 1 inch from the edge of this bed" and "With all their lines and all their might" being examples of this. And I think this works so unbelievably well with what they were going for here. In verse 1, the narrator is singing about how much they've suffered with articulating the pain of their affliction, along with giving out some very interesting descriptors of how the sufferer starts crying from that pain, as evident by lines like "flicking fire like salt water into my eyes." And wow, I find the dichotomy of those lyrics and the nursery rhyme references to be very compelling, as those two ideas blend in immaculately with each other to create a dreamlike atmosphere with a bit of a depressing undercurrent that I myself didn't even catch on first listen. It's pretty powerful. It gets even more so looking into verse 2, where it to an extent seems to relate to death, with that first line telling the listener that death is untimely and no one knows what to say when someone dies as a result of that. I think this song in general has a great sense of creating some kind of storyline, as throughout the rest of this verse, the narrator is sticking by them throughout all this turmoil, and Angelakos here is using the begonia skies imagery to describe the sufferer transitioning into their demise, which seamlessly connects the themes of sleep and death perfectly as well. And yeah, don't be surprised when I tell you that the production itself is so goddamn gorgeous as all can be. And the everything is going to the beat sample coming from Jack Kerouac's reading of the San Francisco scene never fails to pull me into the landscape of it all. And it's also a total earworm too. The harp sample that follows it comes from an Irish song from Mary O'Hara, whose name I'm most certainly gonna butcher up if I try to pronounce it, but it feels in place with this song too when the words of that song translate to "Until the Night of St. John" and I will not come back," living up to the lyrics themselves in the process. It also works well for this song when you realize that Angelakos was getting into a lot of Irish folk music at the time, and I just love how these samples can actually tell a story like that to evoke that feeling of self-expression. On top of that, the synth choices are fantastic, the beats feel wonky but have a greater sense of a purposeful groove, the synth melody after each of the verses is pretty catchy, and Angelakos' delivery on this is amazing, as I love how he uses his mixed voice to hit those high notes with ease. He seriously has great control on this song, man, especially when he's going into these harmonies at the end of each of the verses that sound really beautiful. Given that this song is short, there's not much going on in the production department, but that's really all you need when this one is also packed with very meaningful undercurrents behind it. Instrumentally, this one is sweet and happy on the surface and already has a lot of appeal, but lyrically, it does a great job of telling a story about the loss of a loved one's life, while also succinctly coupling that with the sleep theme that the title of this track conveys. Excellent stuff for sure. Little Big Planet 2 Supremacy and all the rest.
Number 17, Justice and Tame Impala, Neverender.
Alright, I think this will be round 2 of me diving into an individual track from Justice, a French electronic duo who first burst onto the scene in the late 2000s with their debut album, Cross, a consistently great and game-changing release in the world of French house and electro house that contained that signature sonic marriage of those genres alongside electronic rock, new disco, and classical music, as well as some well-written hooks and the integration of so many samples that I myself have enjoyed a lot. Their second and third albums, Audio Video Disco and Woman, are admittedly not as good. The quality of the music on those records took a little bit of a nosedive, but they're both still at least decent to good on average, with some moments here and there that I think show them at their strongest despite the textures on these records being significantly softer in comparison to their debut. But then their most recent album from last year, Hyperdrama, comes along, and by that point it had been over 7 years since Woman dropped. And I will say, I think this is the comeback from them that we most definitely needed. Even though it's slightly front-loaded and still retains a bit more of the same sample-less sound that we've gotten on Woman and AVD, it's also a big step up on those styles too, that brought forth to us even stronger hooks, punchier production that occasionally calls back to their debut, and terrific guest features that sometimes carry even its weakest moments. And the more I've sat with it over the past year, the more it solidifies itself as my favorite album from them apart from Cross. And what a better way to kick off this album than with Neverender, the most voted song in this grab bag and the first of 2 songs on it that feature Tame Impala. And I think this might generally be the best of the 2 collabs in my opinion. Throughout its 3, 4, or 6 minute run, depending on which version of the track you're listening to, the lyrics tell us about the infinite cycle of pain and regret over a past relationship, and the narrator lamenting what they could have done to maintain it longer term. And I think it works well with the production, as it has that perfect balance of drive, hopefulness, and melancholy to really back them up. At the start of the song, and also in the verse and bridge, we as the listeners are given room to breathe in order for the narrator to explain their frustration about not being able to do what they should have done to make it last. And when the chorus hits, we're given that sense of release as Kevin Parker sings about remembering the lows of this said relationship. And the fact that it starts with a major chord almost every time that part shows up works wonders in emphasizing that cathartic vibe. Despite that memorable hook, however, the bridge is where the emotion of the song speaks to me the most, where the narrator further expresses this excruciating and penitent feeling of not being truthful with their partner. And despite me not relating to those lines in that sense as someone who's never been in a romantic relationship, this resonates with me the most because I feel like I could relate those to not being honest with myself. Sometimes there can be days where I feel down because of things I thought were feasible to do not working out in my favor due to certain circumstances. But you know what? That's okay. Sometimes it's good to take a step back and say to yourself, what can I do to make things work out fine and live the best life I possibly can? But enough about the lyricism. This also sounds stellar across the board, as it's arguably the best crafted cut on hyperdrama as well. The synth passages throughout this whole thing sound just as good as usual, especially a little bit into the bridge where we're getting these light synth pastiches that almost sound like glockenspiels. And the funky new disco production cuts through the mix in a satisfying fashion in order for it to be a nice driving force for every other element going into this song. I also love the part in the middle where the production gets more chopped up and slightly reversed, and Kevin Parker is overall a dead-on perfect choice for this song. Both on Neverender and One Night All Night, his soft falsetto delivery carries the tune just as much as this track's already stunning production characteristics, especially on that bridge where his personality shines through more than ever. Not to say it isn't as infectious as his personality when the chorus hits though, as I don't think I need to tell you how catchy that part is. But yeah, this track is fantastic, literally no other way to cut it. It proves that this duo was so totally back in the game after years of being out of the limelight as a duo, and I'll be looking forward to seeing where these 2 legends will go from here.
Number 16, Ween, Transdermal Celebration.
For anyone disappointed in seeing Ween popping up in the bottom 5, don't worry, because these guys are about to make one heck of a redemption arc. Like I've said about this band one time, their supposed weirdness factor is part of the charm. And sometimes, these guys really know how to add in some profound nuances to their sound that make this band stand out, like on their 8th album from 2003, Quebec, which has a level of maturity equal to that of Chocolate and Cheese 9 years prior, but it also has just as much highs, while even having a greater sense of flow and storytelling. And I think the star of the show in that regard has to be the 3rd track on it, Transdermal Celebration. One of their most listened to and well-known tracks in their whole lineup, and for good reason, as this is one of their most brilliantly written tracks they've ever conjured up. This whole album was penned during a tumultuous period in the band's lives, and it isn't just because of them departing from Elektra Records and going to a small independent label. Gene Ween was going through a divorce from his first wife, Dean Ween was dealing with drug-related issues, and Claude Coleman went into a life-threatening car crash that rendered him unable to perform, resulting in Josh Freese taking over as their drummer. This resulted in songs pertaining to failing relationships, drug abuse, and mental health issues due to these horrible events. And on Transdermal Celebration, Gene Ween expresses the drug-related part of this tragedy in the lyrics, with a possible theory I might have in mind being the title of the song itself referencing some crazy drug trip, which kinda makes sense because of what Gene was going for in the first verse. In this part of the song, the narrator is using very interesting imagery by possibly using the transdermal drug as a metaphor for evoking the setting of the nuclear holocaust, pointing out the collapse of a nation, people running for their lives, and mutants revealing themselves. The last of which could be a good representation of how we must confront our own mortality, and acknowledge the frangible beauty of our very existence during these apocalyptic times. I think this verse also reflects well off its psychedelic undertones, as the line, "It toppled down a nation," can pretty much have a double meaning. not only acknowledging that nuclear war decimates nations, but also pointing out the hippie movement that peacefully supported the dissolution of them. Hell, the last 3 lines of that verse can have a double meaning too, because by confronting our own mortality, we're also addressing the flaws that we have as human beings in order to get our lives back on track and also gain a semblance of love and appreciation for each other. The very interesting imagery continues in verse 2, where the narrator is describing a nuclear bomb going off that would cause tectonic tribulations, as it were. And this is also another part of the song where its multiple meanings work well in this song's favor. With the line, "cause the plants to bend with spiked leaves," the narrator is describing the nuclear blast that bends the plants and trees in the literal sense, but in the psychedelic sense, it can refer to marijuana, the most recognizable of the cannabis plant family with spiked leaves. After the chorus, where we get yet another double meaning with that last line describing the rays of radiation that come from a nuclear bomb and how they would pass through the skin, verse 3 is where we get even more thought-provoking imagery, not only lyrically, but also sonically, with the sound of a jet being used the moment the word jet is sung. And I just love that part of the song, since it totally gives it a sense of realism to the whole thing. But what makes this final verse my favorite is those last few lines, where the use of crustaceans in this context can be used to describe bombshells, while the mutation is reused to describe an entity who told the narrator that the nuclear situation is safe, and then they're never seen again. To me, this whole verse really provides the listener with some of its most ear-catching lines, and I really love it for that. And man, this instrumental is great. Gene sounds incredible here, as it seems to me like he's pouring a lot of passion into what he's singing about, especially knowing about the circumstances that led to the development of Quebec. And this can be felt throughout the rest of this track's backbone, with Dean going ham on that electric guitar with the help of that catchy riff, as well as that soaring solo in the middle of it that enraptures me into the world of it. Furthermore, the delay effect on Gene's vocals in the second half is well integrated, the keyboard sounds amazing and adds a ton of personality that I heavily dig. I love the occasional drum fills in some parts too, and the seamless change in meter from 4/4 time in the verses to 6/8 time in the choruses is impeccable. Similar to what I've said earlier in this segment, all of these beautifully psychedelic qualities about the instrumentation itself already help Ween sound like Ween. And when you combine that with its detailed and nuanced lyrical content, it really makes for an emotionally resonant listen in the band's entire catalog that proves that they're not just that goofy band who made that Ocean Man song. They are capable of making deep and wholehearted material as well, and this track is audio proof of that. This is fantastic stuff, and in my opinion, the best song from them I've ever given an individual review / analysis for thus far. The world really was their shellfish, or however you say it.
Number 15, Turquoise Death, Limbo.
Time for another track that sounds just as emotional, but less for the lyrics and more for the instrumental side of things. And what a way to end this tier off than by diving into Turquoise Death, an artist that also really knows how to seamlessly combine two heterogeneous musical aspects, and makes something that sounds just as uniquely beautiful as its concept. The moment I first got into their material was when their 2023 album Say Bueno popped up on my YouTube recommendations a day or two after its release, which I thought was a great demonstration of them embracing elements of dream pop and shoegaze, alongside very fun jungle break workouts to generate a cohesive yet hypnotizing and dense audio escapade from head to toe. And also one I still stand by with its inclusion on my year-end list for that year too. They also have released some stuff under the alias 18 Days, which I haven't gone out of my way to hear yet, but that's not the focal point of this segment, as you can see. Instead, we'll be zeroing in on Say Bueno's 2024 follow-up, Kaleidoscope, an album that technically sort of delivers more of the same, but focuses even more on the jungle aspects of their production, and tries out different subgenres to really play around with their sound more, while still keeping those meditative soundscapes that I always love to hear in an effort from Turquoise Death. And Limbo. Man, I was so close to putting this in the 9 range, but there are other tracks that we'll be getting into later that just did a little bit more for me. Still though, this is an alluring and well-executed track that clearly has a lot of emotions being poured into it, and it's worthy of being called my personal favorite track from this album as a result. If you're looking for some damn good sounding manipulated breaks on this one, well, yeah, no surprise, you're absolutely gonna find them here, which definitely is a given since this is Turquoise Death we're talking about, but the way they get attached to this phaser-like effect as well as some occasional laser sounds at the beginning totally gives them a ton of dynamics and personality that make them become more than just damn good sounding breaks. With jungle-adjacent tracks like this one, I obviously think it's important that the beat and percussion serve as good foundations for them. And Limbo lives up to this expectation in my eyes, seeing as it really had me pumped up the second I pressed play. From that moment on, I was dead set on hearing where this track can go next in terms of atmosphere, and what we get here is absolutely mesmerizing. The synths on here go along with these breaks pretty superlatively, and the way they go up against this commanding bass line makes for such a succinctly energetic mixture that sort of sounds like if Square Pusher remixed a Mute Zix song, which is totally a compliment for an artist that I haven't even talked about a lot on this channel. After we get a metallic lead going up against that bass, we get these riveting and haunting choirs about a minute in that turn what was already something great into one of the most transcendental cuts they've ever done. What can I say? I do love me a good choir, and when they sound like this to feel in place with this track's otherworldly tone, it does make for one compelling brush of skillfulness right here, especially when they're mixed in with a dubstep-ish bassline for a short time around 90 seconds in. I also love that vibraphone type melody, those crystallizing synths, that 80s type lead and the way it sounds like it's being chopped up or something, and those arpeggios toward the end that go so hard and cement this track as proof of this artist's undeniable prowess for creating these dreamlike and mood-brightening auras that can truly make you feel like you can do anything in the world. Seriously, this makes me feel like I'm in the shoes of some protagonist who's in the middle of battling a very tough boss in some well-acclaimed interdimensional themed action-adventure video game or some shit. And I think it speaks volumes when a track like this that normally wouldn't make me think of many things to comment on can simultaneously make me internalize these motives and feelings after each successive listen. And on that note, I don't know what else to say except for one thing. This is excellent stuff as well that hits a lot of notes in just the right amount of ways possible. And again, the very best song on Kaleidoscope for me.
Number 14, Genesis, Duke's Travels.
Alright, we are now in S tier, the place where things are about to get real. And if your song has made it this far, congratulations, you are truly a real one. And we're starting this last tier off with a bang too. Not only my 8th Rob pick, but also a song from a band that I only briefly dove into in video form not too long ago. Genesis was a British band with a pretty interesting evolution in their musical stylings for sure. For the better part of the 70s decade, they came through as among the pioneers of the progressive rock subgenre, with albums like Selling England by the Pound and A Trick of the Tail being great demonstrators of what they could do with this sound, along with their contemporaries such as Yes and Pink Floyd. However, their 1980 album Duke is a bit different. This is where they continue to experiment with a little more of an accessible leading approach that they first showed off with on And Then There Were Three, and simultaneously acted as kind of a swan song for their progressive rock roots, with some hits of them fully committing to this pop-friendly sound that they would later go on to work with more on their very next album. As for what I think of Duke, I think this might generally be one of my favorites from them, as I love how all the tracks flow into each other in a way a concept album does, and I'm glad all three members of the band at the time found this one an easy album to work on, especially after a period of inactivity. But yeah, I can say with 100% confidence that the penultimate track, Duke's Travels, is one of their best composed to date, and of course, my favorite of the bunch in my opinion. Tracks of this style that go on for huge amounts of time are sort of hard to analyze, mainly on the merit of them just having so many twists and turns along the way, but I'll still try my best because, yet again, I do love me a challenge. Alright, here goes nothing. Seeing as this is technically the first of a two-part 10-minute epic at the very end of Duke, this first part certainly aims and succeeds at leaving a strong impression, with some nice electric guitars contrasting with that beautiful trumpet lead, along with some synths and clashing cymbals orchestra style. I also love the way Phil Collins' drumming ever so slowly fades in to really crank the knob up in terms of intensity. And it's kind of funny too how that drum pattern fooled me, thinking that this was going to be in common time before revealing itself to be the foundation of an actual 12/8 rhythm that occurs for a good chunk of this song. It's pretty clever. Afterwards, the aforementioned electric guitars come back in full force, and that synth lead overscoring everything fits well with the song's soundtracky palette. This whole thing has an entrancingly adventurous grace to it that I absolutely love, and that's certainly helped by the chord and modulation changes throughout that really keep me at the edge of my seat, especially at the 444 mark, where it then switches to an actual 4/4 meter for the rest of this song's run. Also, if you know me, then you should know that I definitely do love me a good solo, and this time, we've gotten ourselves a synth solo that's imitating an electric guitar, and it just rips, dude. Like seriously, this sounds tremendous as hell. We finally get this song's lyrics soon after. We're calling to sing about the love between these Duke and Duchess characters, and how it didn't last long due to them thinking too highly of themselves, with the first verse being from the perspective of Duke, and the second verse being from the perspective of Duchess. Even if these lyrics may last for only a small part of the song, they also feel very significant to this song's pacing, as it's essentially a reprise of an earlier song from this album, Guide Vocal, seamlessly playing a big role in this album's interconnecting hit and suite, adding a very nice sense of continuity in the process. Also, while doing some research for this song, I think I've made a very interesting connection. When Collins returned to the UK from Vancouver, Canada because of the end of his first marriage, he started writing a lot of material not just for Duke, but also for his debut solo album Face Value as well. And the lyrics on Duke's travels pertaining to these two characters' infidelity for each other could theoretically have very strong similarities to the conflicts that he might have faced when trying to maintain that marriage. And this sort of interdependence between these two things makes me appreciate this song even more than I already did. And of course, if we start out strong, we gotta end strong. Or technically Duke Sen nails down that task better than how this song ends, but whatever. It's not to say this song doesn't have a pretty emotive ending, because it totally does. As I love how this all wraps up with a killer piano part, and immediately following that up with some synths that portray themselves as flutes, which then flows nicely into Duke's end. Overall, plain and simple, this song rules, and without a doubt, is a big highlight and accomplishment in this band's whole career. Excellent stuff.
Number 13, Porter Robinson, Language.
Oh, nice, this song again. I think my audience should have an idea of who Porter Robinson is at this point, but in case you've been living under a rock for over 10 years, he's an American electronic producer who's had quite the ride over the years as one in mainstream EDM. His 2010 Beatport chart-topping hit, Say My Name, as well as 2011 Spitfire EP, both saw him in his earlier phases experimenting with a variety of different subgenres, such as electro house, dubstep, and complextro. He then released Worlds in 2014, which deviated from those styles in favor of a more electro-pop and progressive house sound, followed by Nurture in 2021, which became even more of a personal album to him lyrically, as well as having a greater emphasis on acoustic elements, and most recently Smile in 2024, which saw him changing up his styles again in favor of drawing influences from pop-punk, hyperpop, and early aughts rave music. He's also released music under a number of different aliases as well, with Virtual Self easily being his most well-known alias apart from his real name. But that's not what I'm talking about. Instead, we'll be talking about his 2012 non-album single that served as big inspiration for the idea behind Worlds, Language. A song that was pretty much indeed an indication of those sounds that he would explore in parts of his debut, most notably the penultimate track, Fellow Feeling, which also had a very climactic progressive house drop in its back half. If you're confused and wondering why I'm saying, oh nice, this song again, it's because I've reviewed this one very highly before in episode 20 of Monthly Submission Rankings nearly 2 years ago. But yeah, I think we all know now that I can do so much better, so let's give it another go. A re-review, if you will. And yeah, my thoughts still have not changed. This is still one of the best tracks he's ever produced. The beats give off your typical mainstream prog house / electro house production during that point in time, but like usual, generate a straightforward yet hard-hitting and groovy essence to them that I already love, especially with that percussive-esque bass line. Immediately following that are these piano passages that sound alluring both sonically and compositionally, and the way they collide with these small synth stabs just evokes Porter's amazing sense of instrumental layering very well. Speaking of the synths, I also love the way they turn huge by the 1 minute barrier that also carries over into the actual drops. And that melody is hella catchy, I swear. Before the drops, you get these build-ups that consist of these sort of vocoder type breakdowns that sound kinda dark, but I think it supremely works well for a song like this, as it proves itself to have strong dynamics too. And just the way they lead into those cathartic drops, it's so damn remarkable. The second half is equally gorgeous, where we're getting these uplifting orchestral strings, as well as uncredited vocals provided by Heather Bright, also known as Bright Lights, singing lyrics that are also technically suggestive of the theming behind Worlds. In that album, he immersed himself in themes relating to nostalgia, fantasy, fiction, and escapism, and I see those emanating off of this song's lyrical content too, particularly the theme of escapism with the line, "Let me float back to the place you found me." Finally, remember when I said this back in episode 20 of MSR?
Think about it now, it kind of does share a bit of similarities with Deadmau5's The Belt, but that's a story for another day.
Well, yeah, according to this comment I found, Deadmau5 was on a call with Porter one time, and he joked about Language sounding similar to The Veldt, and then Porter accused him indirectly of plagiarism after mistaking the joke for a DMCA takedown. I know, silly situation, but I'm sure they've resolved their differences given that this occurred long ago. And plus, I don't know if I'm wrong or not, but the call itself is not available on YouTube anymore. However, I'm mentioning this not to bring on a whole new spectacle about it, but to just simply acknowledge the indistinguishable qualities these songs have, while simultaneously addressing other key differences between the two that pretty much separate them as their own thing. They may have melodies and chord progressions that are kinda alike, But the themes and ideas going into these two tunes make both of them, well, dissimilar in a number of ways. The Veldt was based on a short story written by Ray Bradbury in 1950, constantly referencing the story in almost every aspect of the lyrics, while language briefly touches on escapism and fantasy. On the other hand, the full 11-minute version of the Veldt has an intro that's evident of its African-tinged undertones, while the sound of language is nothing more than just uplifting progressive house and electro house, and both of them therefore have their own underlying charm that makes these two tracks equally enjoyable from my perspective. Enough about that though, I'm not about to turn this into a video essay entitled Deadmau5's The Veldt vs. Porter Robinson's Language, but this track overall is fantastic. Even 13 years later, the production may feel a bit dated, but it's dated in a way where it's held up enough for anyone like myself to want to come back to it frequently as time goes on. And when you mix that in a blender with wonderful build-ups and payoffs, beautiful melodies, and an indiscriminately enjoyable vocal presence, it really makes for one of the highest highs in Porter's entire discography. And again, I'm so glad I got the opportunity to indulge in this one again. It was amazing then, and it's still amazing now. Phenomenal stuff for sure.
Number 12, Weezer, Say It Ain't So.
Holy buddy holly, Batman, we're actually doing it. We're finally going to be talking about Rivers Cuomo and Friends. I don't think any other band has defined the word inconsistent more than Weezer has. Given that they've released over a dozen albums, the quality of their work can be a bit all over the place to say the least. Of course, they got their fair share of stinkers like Ratitude and Pacific Daydream, but I can't lie when I say that they've also got a lot of good projects to sort through, some of which have even struck gold for me. And among those is their self-titled debut from 1994, otherwise known as the Blue Album, which I consider to be, without a doubt, the definitive Weezer album. This is what I believe to have all the best qualities of the group's very geeky sound wrapped into one. And when you back that up with great hooks and riffs as well as some deeply confessional lyrical content, it makes for a special record both inside and outside of their discography. You could argue that it's a bit overhyped, yes, but this album has a lot of highlights that are not only among the best and most recognizable they've made, but also ones that are worthy of returning to, even all those years later. And Say It Ain't So might just be its crown jewel. Hell, maybe even the band's masterpiece. The third and final single for the album, this was inspired by the time when Rivers was 16, in which he discovered a bottle of beer in the refrigerator upon returning home, drawing the connection that his stepfather was leaving since his father began drinking after he split from his mother. As such, the lyrics' vivid imagery successfully reflects the tale of teenage despair in the aftermath of this turmoil, starting with the first verse, where he uses the word chills to summarize the feeling of a cold beer, while also describing the feeling of the declining bond between his stepfather and his mother, as well as himself. And it's heartbreaking knowing alcoholism can tear apart families. In the second verse, the first two lines reference both his stepfather's struggle with alcohol, with that in turn referencing Jim Beam, and his younger brother Leaves, who was nicknamed Jimmy, who would watch television with Rivers and wrestle with him in his free time. And I find this to be a very clever double entendre. The chorus is even more depressing despite its anthemic nature, where he's begging his mother and stepfather to stay with him so he doesn't follow in his father's footsteps, addressing your drug as alcohol, further reinforcing the point that it can ruin families and, well, break hearts. The water slide analogy is probably my favorite piece of imagery in this song, where Rivers Cuomo is using it to describe the exponentially swift gap in this father-son bond. And then in the bridge, he recounts how his father left him while also worrying about alcohol pulling him under. Also, Cuomo said in the Rolling Stone interview that his father, quote, eventually settled in Germany for a while as a suffragan bishop in a Pentecostal church, end quote. Which could explain the "you've cleaned up, found Jesus" line. I don't think I have much in the way of comments concerning the instrumentation itself, but it is right on par with the lyrics in terms of enjoyment, because much like with some of the Blue Album's best moments, this band had such a way of making it feel right at home and comfortable to the listener despite its simple nature, especially with those guitars that give off that hanging out with your relatives by the barbecue kind of vibe. And I think the slow tempo helps these guys out with getting their message across in a palpable manner. On top of that, Cuomo sounds great on here, especially on that catchy chorus where he has this upfrontness about his voice that allows him to bring forth a whole lot of passion, and huge props to the band for modulating to a closely related key at the bridge to add somewhat of a new dimension to this song, as it empowers this part to be that moment of tension while also working well off its lines regarding how his father left him. It's a really cool way to spice up a song, and I totally appreciate them for that. Also, I don't think I need to say it, but I'll say it anyway. The guitar solo is outstanding, and works so greatly as that huge moment of release after that bridge. Guitar solos still do make everything better, huh? Overall, this is an amazing showcase of this band's beautiful chemistry with each other, as well as that uniquely geeky yet grounded sound that a lot of us love them for. It's profoundly saddening with its lyrics, but manages to still be accessible via a great hook, great vocals, great guitar and drum work, just great everything.
Number 11, Kiro Kiro Benito, Dear Future Self.
And carrying the torch for relatively popular artists that I've somehow never talked about before, we have Kiro Kiro Benito, a British indie pop band who have pretty diverse tinges of bubblegum pop, hyperpop, and even dance rock sprinkled in too. And their sound was also initially influenced by J-pop, dancehall, and video game music as well. And those styles especially pervaded every part of their 2013 mixtape, Intro Benito, as well as their 2016 debut album, Benito Generation. The latter of which I thought was very good, and had just the right amount of colorful leading touches to not feel too saccharine for me. And combining that with its themes relating to social media and the curiosity of youth made me get its appeal more. And then 2018 rolls along, and it wasn't just your ordinary year. It was a completely different year for KKB Sound. On October 1st of that year, they released their sophomore album, Time and Place. And wow, talk about the best possible maneuver for these guys that you can imagine. Swerving in a more shoegaze direction that they first dabbled with on the One True EP earlier that year, while losing that sense of innocence that they displayed on Benito Generation, even going into themes relating to physical objects and environments as well as the loss of loved ones. And yes, I also think this is a big improvement over their debut in my eyes, as I love the down-to-earth and even at times hard-hitting aura of almost all of these songs that also retain a bit of the same appeal that made them want to be on the lookout for in the first place. Funnily enough though, my favorite song on the album doesn't even go into these dance rock / shoegaze approaches, and if you somehow didn't know where this was going, I'm of course referring to Dear Future Self. And my goodness, this might be the best song Sarah Midori Perry and the gang have ever done, which is saying a lot given the quality of Time and Place. This is a short but bittersweet little number that traverses the fluid nature of personal identity, as well as being some sort of love letter to the future. And given the times of today, I think this is a song that we all need right about now. The first verse conjures up this image, insinuating that the narrator is returning to this song after many years to see if they've drastically changed, with that "girl you buried" line suggesting that she made a time capsule for her future self to dig up, as implied by this letter shown on the single art. That last line is honestly chilling knowing what this song is going for, as being anxious for the future is a pretty perspicuous feeling to have. And plus, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that the person I am is completely disparate to the kind of person I was 1, 2, 5, or even 10 years ago. Even the world around us has obviously changed as we've grown older, which perfectly leads us into the pre-chorus, where we're given more doses of some of the band's most palpable songwriting, where the narrator is telling us about how remorse might result from indecision through this vision, and how people stay inside because they think they will always have plenty of time to fulfill their ambitions, all without realizing that we might not be able to do the things we enjoy doing anymore, reflecting off their fears concerning the impact of climate change very well. In the chorus, we're given the classic futuristic tropes such as time traveling and wondering if cars will ever fly, but it's not limited to just that. The narrator is not only continuously wondering how much her life is altered, but also saying that you don't really care about what's happening to you and anyone around you when you're younger compared to when you get older, where you then embrace the fact that life is not permanent. I think it's a universal feeling we have because, for example, for the longest time, it felt as though the 2020s were like a century away, but since the COVID pandemic half a decade ago, it felt as though the years went by almost too quickly to truly live our lives to the fullest. It's quite scary. After Sarah sings about what the narrator's future self might find in this supposed time capsule in the second verse, they then acknowledge in this new pre-chorus that adulthood by then can be both arduous and toll-taking as we lose people the more we get older and are tasked with more responsibilities, and then hope that their future self doesn't hate the world. What makes that last line so powerful is both facing this reality and how it can turn us into resentful people towards the world and everyone else, with the narrator or the past self also convincing themselves to not give off that same attitude going forward. And amalgamating that with this build up into the final chorus nearly made me shed a tear, I'm telling you, man. And seeing as I'm already talking about this track's instrumental qualities, let's get into those. And yeah, it's nothing more than just beautifully sunny stuff that works off its melancholy in the lyrics very effectively. I love the almost video game OST nature of this one a hell of a lot, as those do vocals at the beginning totally nail down those vibes in my mind immediately after hearing them. And Sarah's vocals are great, as she's honestly a perfect choice for portraying this past self character. On top of that, Gus Lobin's production is amazing, as I love the bombastic essence of this one to give it a sense of actually hoping for the future, even though the band is fearing what'll happen by then, as evident by that wonderful orchestral string arrangement from Bowen. Other elements about this song that I love include some timpani drums and cymbals, glockenspiel melodies because of course, the backing vocals towards the end, and how the aforementioned strings transition so well into visiting hours. Don't know what else to say. This is an emotional gut punch of a song with such a great instrumental that makes this one stand out from the rest of the album, as well as resonant lyrics that also make this a comforting listen at the same time. I love this a lot.
Number 10, Bent, Cylons in Love.
Here we go, the top 10, the last fifth of the entire list. And starting that off, we have Bent, an English electronic music duo from Nottingham who were initially known for their sample-based flourishes on downtempo music that they demonstrated with on their first two records, before dialing back on said styles to shift focus to more organic instrumentation from 2004 onwards. While their acoustic-oriented pieces of their output didn't always hit, I always preferred their more sample-based material because of how much they used a wide array of them to paint a vivid picture that immerses the listener into the wonder that is their beautiful sound and what they do with it as a form of expression. And that is exactly what I'm getting at with their debut album from 2000, Programmed to Love, which is undoubtedly the strongest point in their entire oeuvre, and I don't think I'll be on the receiving end in the way of arguments by saying that. I don't consider it to be a masterpiece to the same extent as an album like The Avalanche's Since I Left You, which for the record also came out the same year, but despite that, I often found myself enjoying this album's easy to get lost into atmosphere a whole ton, which allowed it to stand out as having its own unique identity that very few projects of the style try to replicate to perfect results. From the variety on display, to the amazing vocal and sample integrations, to the seamless transitions, it's a really creative, well-structured, and endearing album that pulls out the stops both in terms of emotional resonance and in terms of serving up what felt like meaningful storylines to me. And Silence in Love is everything that is enjoyable about this record wrapped into one song, and then some. The reverberating guitar that kicks off the song does a great job at acting as that one part underpinning the entire thing, along with a nice operatic vocal, simple but plotting drum patterns, and an alluring piano melody that helped the foundation of this one become stronger. It gets even more so 36 seconds in, where we're getting a sped up and distorted version of the opening lines from a 1957 Katie Lee song called The Will to Fail, which worked sufficiently as a way to set the stage for the rest of the lyrics, while also generating this image of an individual not willing to commit to anything and embrace whatever comes their way. And combining it with that deep sub-bass made the impact of that sample source much more vigorous. It also bears bringing up that this is the only song on Programmed to Love to feature vocoders. Ooh, exciting! And wow, Bent really does put them to extremely good use. The lyrics after that previously mentioned sample simulate some sort of like a breakup scenario, which, to be honest, is not necessarily an uncommon trope to use in a song, but the way they executed this trope is outstanding. The lyrics come from the perspective of someone yearning for the days when the relationship was going well, saying stuff like how their ex-lover/partner was an angel when they first met them, and then acknowledging that a part of them died when they split up, followed by this heart-wrenching mantra of, "Why don't I love you like I used to do?" These lyrics may sound a bit generic at a glance, but man, there's something about those damn vocoders that amplify the emotional connection of this song even further from my view. It's kind of like contributing to some fictional story about two robots parting ways or something, and one of them singing about how things will never be the same without them on their side. Eventually, the narrator briefly laments the loneliness caused by their sad breakup before realizing that they're probably better off being free, so to speak. Followed by that same hook, but now with the slightly altered mantra of, "Why don't you love me like I want you to?" further insinuating this level of desperation of the narrator wanting things to go back to the way they were before. As for the instrumentation, well, I don't think there's much more to comment on in that department. Aside from some tiny guitar riffs, misty synth passages, and other parts where the drums cut off, there are not that many things popping at you all that much. I mean, it's not like I'm talking about Duke's Travels by Genesis again. But I think it's another thing that makes this song as special as it is, because its sheer simplicity does take advantage of not only strengthening its lyrical subtleties, but also sharing a story, most of all. And on this song, I believe Bent succeeded at that. This is overall a fantastic, reflective sounding track with illustrious downtempo production, beautiful melodies, and uncomplicated lyrics that fit the tone of this song excellently, as does the brilliant sample integration at the start. I don't know if anyone else might be crazy about the song as I am, but for me, this is amazing stuff, plain and simple.
Number 9, The Blue Nile, The Downtown Lights.
And here's another song that I've already talked about in monthly submission rankings making its way into this grab bag, except that I've already done so in episode 10 back in 2022, and that was way before I started writing scripts for videos of this kind, resulting in an ultra shallow impromptu review of it. But like with language, I think this is the perfect time to more or less start over. Following Bent is another British artist, this time being Scottish synth-pop band The Blue Nile, and chances are you might only be familiar with Hats, their second album from 1989 that perfectly captures that fascinatingly melancholic feeling of isolation one might experience living that shiny urban life, resulting in 7 songs that are filled to the brim with minimalistic yet rich production that works brilliantly off its sheer emotional moments as well as the band's incredible musicianship. And yeah, I freaking love this album like anyone else. Hell, this album was so highly praised, even Jordy Grieve of Black Midi fame apparently called it among his top 10 albums of all time. Coincidentally enough, the song from it that I'll be talking about also falls within the top 10, but on this ranking. And it's none other than the only pre-album single, The Downtown Lights. And retrospectively, I don't think I gave this one enough credit when I first talked about it nearly 3 years ago, because this song is way, way better than I remember it being. Hats is home to some of the most pristine production I've heard on any synth-pop record, but very few tracks match the scope and beauty of it all that is The Downtown Lights. This one also reaches the 6-minute barrier, and for a song like this should drag on forever and ever, but it doesn't feel like it does. Everything surrounding this cut just leaves me near transfixed the entire damn time. And the way these fluttery keys and synths pulled me into that atmosphere is, no joke, absolutely palpable. We're then greeted with a spot-on vocal performance from Paul Buchanan, singing these lyrics that are like an ode to the aforementioned feeling of loneliness from living out that urban city lifestyle, with the first verse acting as an acknowledgement of how frantic and depressed the two lovers' lives have gotten, and the Downtown Lights representing this beacon of hope that reassures them. And all the while that this is occurring, we're also getting these slow drum patterns and flashback-inducing chord progressions that help this song's already imaginative lyrical content become more impactful than before. What I love about this song is how these guys use these downtown lights in different perspectives. In verse 2, they feel more at arm's length from these two characters whose loneliness is now growing louder and louder thanks to these bright lights that now feel like a bit of a mockery to the characters' emotions. On the other hand, in verse 3, these then go back to being brought up in a welcoming manner, bringing up the idea that one can do more in the city than just sit around and worry about those overwhelmingly secluded feelings. As a side note, I think it's clever how some organ-like synth comes in at the end of each verse. From my perspective, I can think of those as these downtown lights communicating with these two lovers. Another thing that really makes this song stick from the crowd. The chorus in between those two verses nicely goes along with this theme of alienation and disconnect being present throughout, as the narrator can assess whether the person he's in love with feels the same way about him, entering him into a state of despondency, sadness, and borderline frustration. And those string plucks in this part do a great job of giving off more of that idea. On top of that, and I know I'm not mentioning this all the time because I would just be reiterating the same point over and over again, Paul Buchanan really does have an incredible voice. The amount of passion he radiates throughout this entire thing actually moves me to such an immaculate degree that very few tracks of this style measure up to it. He himself carries this song just as much as all the other elements going into it, and it's hard not to love his performance for that. Finally, this outro has a really nice sense of foreshadowing too, because it's also another spot-on representation of this theme of loneliness and melancholy in pretty much any part of the city that the album was setting up, like, in this case, rented rooms and rented cars, and the empty trains. And the electric guitar before this part is also kick-ass too. This song, as well as this album, truly has to be an anomaly to study. To create something so far ahead of its time that it could have mistaken this for a song being released any later than 1989 must have required some sort of a magical spark, which I undoubtedly see in this here tune. It's synthetic, yet not at all artificial. It's emotional, yet not over-sentimental or too cloying. The hook is sticky in the best way, the flow this song has is through the roof, and the imagery is well integrated and fits amazingly with Hat's premise. And when you combine that with Buchanan's beautiful vocal performance, as well as the track's other best instrumental qualities, you get one of the best and most earnest demonstrations of this nocturnal setting being used in synth-pop songs of this caliber. I simply adore this one, and nothing will ever change that.
Number 8, Sakura Burst, Data Corruption Symphony.
Moving on to my 9th throb pick, and oh boy, I am so excited to finally talk about this talented artist on my channel. Also, as a disclaimer, I'm aware that she now goes by the name Sylvere, but for the sake of this video, I'll just refer to her as Sakura Burst. Now then, I'm quite a fan of the work of Sakura Burst and what they have done to contribute to the refinement of this upscale-esque IDM sound, particularly her debut from 2015, Deconstructing Nature, an album I very briefly brought up once when talking about White Palace by Even and Spillstain in MSR23. And now, fast forward to about 18 months after the publishing of that video, and now a track from it has indeed made its way here. As for Deconstructing Nature, I first came across this a couple of years ago after seeing quite a lot of rave reviews about it, and checked it out of curiosity as an attempt to further expand my electronic music tastes. And yeah, I still stand by this being one of my favorite albums of the entire 2010s decade in general. I'm glad this album is still considered a big early influencer on this side of IDM, alongside such similar albums as John Hopkins' Immunity, because this one is a valiantly magnificent record from the first second to the last, featuring incredible and stylized production and mixing that I can't believe still holds up a decade later. I also adore the transitions in between each track, as well as the variety being shown here, bringing on 10 distinctive pieces that range from IDM to ambient to dubstep to even garage, with not a single moment on there that I didn't enjoy, as all of them work flawlessly off its elite cinematic aesthetic. If I were tasked with ranking all the tracks on deconstructing nature from worst to best, I'd say it'd be kind of a difficult task to do because of the quality they bring to the table despite this album's small track quantity. It honestly would be akin to doing a ranking of every episode from Avatar: The Last Airbender or something. However, one track on here that I think is a massive standout is the penultimate track, Data Corruption Symphony. A kind of short but masterful marriage of trap, dubstep, OST equivalent flourishes, and Windows 7 sound effects? Not gonna lie, these sound effects technically seem like very unconventional add-ons, but they work very well for this track's gimmick, and Sakura Burst's implementation of those is actually pretty fun, as does this intro with some scraping effects leading into these majestic choir-like ambient synth washes that get me pumped up about where this track could go next. Then we get these harp melodies alongside some nice water recordings and a little bit of cello string sections, and this is where we first get to hear these Windows effects coming into play. More notably, that ding sound that later gets repurposed into a slow but beautiful and purposeful motif, showing Sakura Burst's bursting creativity on this wonderful journey that is this track's sonic canvas. Also, the way the other effects just randomly play a second before that chord progression did get a chuckle out of me on first listen from how it just catches me off guard, reminding me of that one part in 404 by Knife Party where the synths get chopped up before that thumping error sound. I'm not kidding when I say that the chord progression is so goddamn soul-lifting though, especially when it gets backed up by these orchestral strings as well as some snare drum fills to go for a more dramatic sensation. After that, we got a stylistic change from ambient material to its trap-ish sound, and while the flow technically takes a backseat temporarily due to how simple the drum patterns are, I also love this part just as much as anywhere else here, mainly because of the way she uses these Windows clicking sound effects as hi-hats of some kind, and throwing a really nice arpeggio and an indicative sounding dubstep bass line in the mix made that part all the more enjoyable. Now let's get to why I've placed this track so high on this ranking. That second drop, and it is just godlike, dude. 2 minutes in, just when this track is going into a more return to form with the aforementioned harp melodies, that drop comes in to absolutely blow the fucking roof off. Like, jeez, that bass line is so sick and gels off its more drum patterns in such a beyond effective manner that I'm kind of running out of words to muster up how I'm feeling about that part. Like, it just goes bananas from here on out. And to say I love it for that is understating it severely. And the way it ends with some drone E pads and that ding effect acting as a riser to lead into more IDM-esque noises and a callback to the harps is really great. All in all, there's a lot to enjoy about this track that, along with cherry blossoms explode across the dying horizon, does a great job at perfectly contributing to this album's closing stretch. The orchestrals on this thing are immaculate, the Windows 7 sound effects are really cool and at times pretty funny, the build-ups and payoffs work brilliantly off of each other, and it sums up Sakura Burst's sound incredibly well. An absolute blast to listen to on all fronts.
Number 7, Linkin Park, Numb.
Next on the docket is where we enter into that special category of songs that fall into that ballpark of the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about a specific music genre at a given point in time. And this song is one of those examples. Linkin Park. Where do I even begin with these guys? It's kind of hard giving them their own little introduction here because, well, they're pretty much one of the most iconic bands who have come out of the early 2000s part of the nu metal scene. But the reason for why this is can, of course, be traced back to what I believe is a collection of some of their best work, their first 2 studio albums, Hybrid Theory and Meteora. I enjoyed both of these albums to almost parallel measure because of how this band does very excellently at experimenting with styles of nu metal, rap rock, alternative rock, and the like, while also using said styles to express their emotionally charged feelings in a way that totally resonates with people given the time and day to listen to them. Despite the overwhelmingly high amount of similarities these two projects have, they are both still tons of fun to sit through, with convivially banging instrumentals and legendary vocal performances from Mike Shinoda and the late Chester Bennington that were simply unmatched in the rock music sphere at the time. Having said that, if I had to pick which of these two could be my favorite, it would be Meteora. even if it's just by a smidge. While Hybrid Theory technically has the better songs, at the same time, Meteora also has better pacing and a greater sense of world building. Hence, this is getting the slight edge for me in their discography. Alluding a bit to what I've said before about deconstructing nature in the last segment, I love almost every single track on this album in indescribably varying ways. And the center of the incredible quality on display lies in what closes out the album, Numb. You can make at least one argument about that one song from this band that literally everyone knows, but Numb is a pretty solid answer to that argument because this song over here is outstanding and borderline life-affirming. I think the messaging behind this one is so damn gripping in its sheer universality, as it tells the story of someone wanting to break free from the shackles of feeling like they're struggling to meet one's expectations, which not only made it an anthem for a generation struggling with pressure and identity, but also an avenue for Bennington to channel these emotions he had boiling up from his rather tumultuous youth, all in one spectacular 3-minute ender. This is especially evident in this first verse, where the narrator is feeling nothing more than misunderstood, describing the fatigue, hopelessness, emotional withdrawal, and uncertainty coming from matching up to these expectations, as well as feeling like a burden from attempting to follow a more identical route to someone else's rather than going their own way. Some of the lyrics here may be a bit simple, but the phrase simple but effective is definitely applied here, because again, this is a universal situation where many of us can sadly relate. The pre-chorus is one of the most evocative showcases of Bennington and Shinoda's chemistry ever, as the former is cementing the pessimistic feeling of never having those needs being met, while the latter is utilizing a great form of imagery of the undertow to articulate being forcibly inundated by the outright pressure of it all, with that added in line in the second pre-chorus later on being the ultimate realization that they can't put someone else's expectations ahead of their own happiness and who they are. The storytelling on this is honestly amazing, because the previously stated feeling of detachment is then employed on that anthemic and memorable chorus, where the narrator is then emotionally drained from both these standards and even their own wants, while growing weary of trying to fit in and having a strong desire to stop being a mirror of what other people want them to be, and instead become an independent, genuine person. Another thing about this song that is so resonant for a lot of us. While the second verse sees this authoritative figure trying to possess every single move our narrator makes, they then realize in the bridge that they may also not live up to these expectations either, as many others have done before. And at that point, these two parts cement this song as one having contained some of the band's strongest lyricism to have ever been penned. Furthermore, this whole song sounds fantastic as well. The guitar melodies are beautiful and catchy, the dichotomy between the industrial beats and the intense nu metal drumming is so well done, and as mentioned before, Chester Bennington and Mike Shinoda work perfectly off of each other too, even if it's only in small parts this time around. Bennington had a really great voice that always glued this band together for the longest time, and when he got backed up by Shinoda's rapping, they genuinely turned already great instrumentals into literal star-studded events. This is one of the most well-acclaimed songs that they've ever released to date, and yeah, as you can tell from everything I've said, I'm no different with this one. I think it's all around a damn near masterpiece that's beautifully self-aware, emotionally resonant, and yet another fun time even a little over 2 decades later. And may Chester Bennington continue to rest in eternal peace. Now the top 6 are special, and when I say special, I do really mean, without a shadow of a doubt, special. This roster of songs has been so good quality-wise that these next 6 songs are what I consider to snugly fit in that 10 out of 10 category. This means, with the exception of my number 1, that these next few songs could switch around in any order depending on my mood. Starting that off with...
Number 6, Jamie XX, Loud Places, featuring Romy.
Alright, 10 out of 10 time. If your song has made it this far, massive congrats to you. And what an interesting way to kick that off than by talking about Jamie XX, a member of the XX alongside Romy and Oliver Sim, and probably one of my favorite solo electronic artists who have popped off in the 2010s, as I believe In Color, his debut album from 2015, showed him to be a really creative thinker with his takes on house, future garage, down-tempo, and guitar-driven ambient music that, in turn, resulted in one ethereal and well-balanced effort whose sound is a hell of a distance away from the sound of his comeback from a year ago in Waves, where he leaned hard into more hard-hitting and sample-based material. If you want to hear my thoughts on In Waves, by the way, feel free to request something from that album for the voting round for my next grab bag, but I'll just leave it at this. It's a comeback from him that I think we needed. I don't want to get too distracted though, so let's keep our focus on the debut right now. Filled with a ton of standouts as well as great vocal features, In Color remains my favorite of his two mainline albums for not only how alluring the production is, but also for its impeccable cohesion. And once again, it is absolutely insane how this one has aged like the finest wine ever. I remember when I made a shoddily put together ranking video on this album 3 years ago, and wound up giving it an 8.7 out of 10. But nowadays, I think it most certainly breaks the 9 range for me at least. And tracks like Loud Places are the key reason why. Even in my first couple of listens, I still considered it one of my favorites because it's one of the tracks from him that I think best demonstrates his strengths as a producer, while also being incredibly relatable on the inside. Right from the beginning, the well-crafted levels are off the charts, as the kick drum and ambient synths going up against conversing crowd recordings fit well with this song's premise about seeking out loud places to block out the regretfulness our narrator's feeling from a breakup. And that voice! In my opinion, Romy has one of the most majestic voices in all of dance music, and I say that very strongly. Both on this track and Seesaw, as well as on the entirety of her mid-era album, her soft yet driving vocals really just have this way of putting me in a dreamlike daze every time she opens her mouth, reeling me into this track's lily-white atmosphere in the process and colliding superbly with that awesome piano chord progression. Also, that dinky bottle rhythmic percussion is pretty fun and is mixed in perfectly. The bass feels super impactful and in the moment. That electric guitar part in the second half of the track is very well arranged, and I just adore the way the production kind of explodes in the choruses, with that sample of Could Heaven Ever Be Like This by Idris Muhammad acting as that poignant mantra that has this beautiful overlap with what the song is conveying to the listener. All the track's production aspects are amazing enough, but the lyrics themselves really do transcend it in a way that just cuts through in a spellbinding way from my point of view. This kind of has a similar set of lyrical ideas to the Downtown Lights from earlier, but instead of singing about the loneliness that comes with living an urban city life, Romy is singing about the loneliness that comes with missing out on the memories she could have been having with her lover in a crowded area, like a club, bar, etc. In the first verse, like I've said before, she wants to go to these places to get rid of these feelings, and it works well with the aforementioned crowd recordings because it to an extent symbolizes her willingness to come to these places in order to achieve a tranquil state. But then she acknowledges in the back half of that verse that they have gone on in their own separate ways. There's also the sense of determination and or relentlessness in the chorus and bridge, with the way the narrator is convinced that she and they will always be together, which makes that Idris sample work even better, because she's always concerned about them finding a new level that'll make them feel more content long term. The narrator is also confused as to why her lover is no longer happy with the relationship, because by the time we get to verse 2, she's still clinging on to the past, and it's like she'll never get over it. And the intimate relatability of some of these bars is why I adore it outright. Since we all have our moments when we're tired of the present day and just want to go back to a simpler time, where we didn't have to worry much about anything, as well as actually being optimistic about the future. In a way, this last set of lines in the outro about ecstasy kind of puts everything into perspective, as she's forced to let go of the relationship and to accept that her lover will find their own loud places to explore, and that the narrator won't be there when they come back from that because at the end, she will have already moved on. Man, just the sheer realism of this song is absolutely palpable. It's incredible. For all that it's worth, I love this track so much from the beginning to its very conclusion. It's not only pristine and very well ahead of its time, but it's also something that I find to be so moving, even as someone who's never had to experience that feeling of insecurity from a romantic split up. And it's one that I'm proud to call one of the best tracks Jamie has to offer.
Number 5. Music. Hasty Boom Alert.
So remember when we made a massive comeback in this video, going from being in the bottom 5 to almost cracking the top 15? Well, get a load of Mike Paradina's redemption arc over here, because we're truly looking at a certified drill and bass classic right here. Lunatic Harness is easily his most recognizable project to date, and probably one of the first that comes to mind when thinking about the great lineup of music being released on the Planet Mu label, alongside Venetian Snare's Ross Chitsulaga Latsulutet, of course. This also seems to be most people's favorite album under the Music name, and while I don't agree with this being the absolute best of his work when Tango Invective and Bluff Limbo are sitting right there, it definitely falls within my top 3 of his albums personally, and given his consistency over the years, that's really saying a lot. Apart from Two Clunkers, there's not a single track on here that I don't think is at least good, and it also nails down the balance between abrasiveness and beauty so well. The intricate as all hell melodic pastiches on tracks like My Little Beautiful, Catkin and Teasel, Embrace Yourself Jason, the huge amounts of swagger emanating off the chopped up and harsh breakbeats on tracks like Approaching Menace and Midwinter Log, and the more creative and ambitious moments as seen with the Tower track and Secret Stairs numbers 1 and 2, are all the things about this album that I think are worth relishing in. However, there's one track on this album that I feel is a different breed from the rest of the track listing. And of course, it's none other than the one, the only, Hasty Boom Alert. And oh boy, this track is a doozy. And I do mean that in the best possible sense. This is what I consider to also be a part of the holy trinity of tracks from him that I think are the most enrapturing and enthralling in his prolific and intimidating yet underappreciated catalog, alongside Weakling Paradinus and Twanglefret. And each listen of this thing continues to give me even more justifications to keep it in that special league of absolutely amazing. What I love about this track is that it feels like that there are so many things popping at you throughout its easygoing 5 minutes that somehow keep you on your toes continuously that you don't know where to start. I know you're probably going to ask me, but Robert, isn't that contradicting what you said about Katamari on the Swing being a touch too overwhelming for you due to a lot of things happening all at once to the point where it's kind of hard to analyze? Well, yeah, you're probably right. But I think the biggest factor that separates it as its very own special escapade is how progressive it feels. That everything going into it feels like it's all coming together at just the correct amount of stride and dynamics, so it doesn't feel the slightest bit too overwhelming for its own good. Right from the start, I knew I was most likely going to hear one of the most well-done drill and bass tracks ever made. As the Feed Me Weird Things era square pusher type ambient pads going up against that filtering hi-hat is one heck of an effective amalgamation that immediately transports me into the dimension that this track generates. And the melody appearing 15 seconds in is not just memorable, but also has a motive. A motive to be like a shining, burning light that truly leads you to the quest that Hasty Boom Alert takes you on. And yes, I did say dimension. To me, this is not a world builder. This is a dimension builder. I think that should give you a clue of how much of a masterpiece I think it is. And the brake work on this thing is insane. Whenever I hear the way these shifted brakes come in to get chopped up, filtered in and out, or even slowed down, I just think about how incredible the nuanced nature of these brakes truly is, as they do a fantastic job of being the foundational elements of what makes it spectacular. I also love it when the brakes cut out at some parts so we're only left with just these gorgeously composed synths. And despite being a seemingly minor part of it, it changes so much about the pacing of this track, but in a good way, as I think it represents sort of like a calm before the storm moment, or maybe a place where the track feels like it's getting slightly more vulnerable, which makes it have a more moving quality to it that I appreciate heavily to the high heavens. The ending pretty much ties the whole thing together in one perfectly tied bow, as the slow and barely untouched lo-fi-esque breaks that close it out are so fantastically employed when it comes to making me feel like everything will be alright and that we'll pull through the shitstorm that this trip around the sun has put us through. No fancy word in the English dictionary that I can manage to muster up can even describe the utmost adoration I have for this track. Everything about it is so carefully well arranged to make it feel so relaxing, so vibey, and so wrapped up in a lot of positive adjectives that are hard to articulate. Hasty Boom Alert really makes me feel joyful to be alive, and determined to keep pushing through the ups and downs that occur in this world. And for a 5-minute instrumental electronic track that's technically microscopic in its progression, that is quite an Olympic achievement in and of itself. Unequivocally amazing stuff.
Number 4, Magdalena Bay, Death and Romance.
You know, there's nothing harder about making videos like this than to talk about songs that literally everyone has already discussed. Fans have raved about it and critics have sung about it. And the fact that this is among the most voted in is surely evident of that. Despite this, I am a firm believer that for certain songs that are just as amazing as this one, I don't see any harm in trying to take a stab at it, and that's what I'll gladly be doing right here in this segment. Barely missing out on the top 3 is Magdalena Bay, the Los Angeles, California-based all-pop and synth-pop duo consisting of Mika Tenenbaum and Matthew Lewin. And I have to say, they may have released only 2 proper albums, but man, this duo has packed a ton of artistic merit into their short studio album discography so far, with Imaginal Disc unsurprisingly being my favorite of their releases. While Mercurial World saw them getting in the groove of their dance pop sound, Imaginal Disc is where they started to up their game even further by expanding the scope of their production and simultaneously working well as a concept album that leans more to themes of self-exploration and consciousness. And the end result was a collection of 15 tracks that delivered one well-executed cut after the next. All the songs on this album really do contribute to its theming and atmospheric sonic palette just about as well as you would expect, and I'm able to tell the tracks apart from each other despite almost all of them going for that same massive sound. From the incredible singles leading up to it like Image and Tunnel Vision, to the just as incredible non-singles like Vampire in the Corner and The Ballad of Matt and Mika, this is one of the most well-done pop albums I've heard last year that's jam-packed with a lot of great writing, along with sound design that can quite literally lift up my soul at times. But Death and Romance is something else entirely. I don't know how much of a stretch it is for me to say this, but this song is absolutely perfect in every way, shape, and form, regardless of it being just a year old at this point. No matter how many times I've listened to it, I just couldn't deny the hype for this one. It's the best showcase of how this duo really knocked it out of the park with Imaginal Disc. Let me preface any meaty lyrical details by delving into this production for a bit, and wow, this thing is vast. I can assure you that this is one of the most boundlessly expansive sounding songs you will hear on this ranking. But these wonderful peeps do an excellent job at gracefully making every single vessel going into this track's backbone matter, while also making 5 minutes feel like 3. Right from the beginning, where these powerful pianos come in, Death and Romance already leads with electricity, exuberance, and excitement. Those 3 positive descriptors starting with an E that I am more than happy to find in this song. The drumming here is also incredible, as it has this constantly groovy and escalating build all throughout that makes this song become much more of an impactful listening experience. On top of that, the synths are sublimely implemented too, especially at the end. The chord progression change later on is so very satisfying to the ears, and Mika vocally delivers such a positive level of charisma that I can't help but call this entire song home to one of her best performances to date. Everything concerning the sound of this track is exceptional, but blending that with the confidence and passion spewing out of her vocal presence helps this song soar to very high heights. And the lyrics themselves amplify it even further to a profound extent. This song is simulating the moment where a woman is left alone by her alien boyfriend, as noted by the UFO in the single art, which nicely ties into the concept of this character named True, who is relearning the meaning of being human. Given that this song is also questioning the meaning of life, whether or not it's for death and romance, so to speak. You know you're truly in for something when the very first bar, Tuesday on a Red Star, can be left up to multiple different interpretations. First off, it's pretty poetic how the song was released on May 28th, 2024, aka a Tuesday. Secondly, this could either be referencing the red planet Mars or red giants in general. For me, I'm more likely to agree with the red giants analogy, since they are stars to begin the process of dying after running out of fuel, which is tied in beautifully with what happens later on in verse 1, where the narrator is questioning about being too late and regarding the integrity of the relationship between herself and her boyfriend. I don't know about you guys, but I love it when symbolism like this is neatly employed in songs like this. It really makes the song even more fun to dissect. And the chorus gets even better too, where the narrator wants to keep holding on to the relationship while also saying how their affections for each other are uncontrollable, which makes their spin on the saying all is fair in love and war all the more clever. It's also very resonant outside of the story it's setting up, because it's also saying that when we die, we'll no longer be with the people we love and cherish the most, which is why, true to its lyricism, nothing is fair in Death and Romance. The second verse basically sees her acknowledging that the relationship has become nothing more than a never-ending cycle of paradise and heartbreak, which also works well off this song's premise, because if the first verse touches on death, then the second verse touches on romance. I do appreciate it when a song has 2 parts that are talking about separate things, yet they still manage to fit together as one whole. An example of masterful songwriting at play here. My favorite part in this song has to be the bridge, where the narrator is not only certain that their affections for one another are too excessively intense, but also realizing that their fear for losing one another is what's both stabilizing and messing with the relationship. And the way it starts softer and quickly builds into that cathartic release of that final chorus just leaves me awestruck at how fully connected the instrumentation and lyrics on this one feel. Overall, this song is a spectacular and already timeless masterpiece in the world of synth pop, much less pop as a whole, with not a single con I have against it whatsoever. The only negative complaint? I fucking want more, damn it. I feel a surge of euphoria through my soul every time I hear it. So I would have nothing against this track even if it were twice the length. Both Mika and Matt are to be commended not just for the work they've put into their albums, but also for this standalone song, because this made for such a fantastic lead single to Imaginal Disc.
Number 3, Air, Don't Be Light.
Oh hell yeah! Finally, the very first time we're delving into the work of Nicolas Godin and Jean-Benoit Dunkel. otherwise known as Air. I mean, talking about music from two pros in the world of downtempo, chill out, and lounge, sign me up. I only started getting into these guys about 2 or 3 years ago, and to be frank, I'm kind of disgusted that it took me that long to get into them despite having heard about them for a while, because all 6 of their albums are totally worth hearing, especially for people who are into the kind of genres they're providing here. Their meditative and sophisticated mixes of downtempo, space rock, chill out, psychedelia, prog rock, and more were something that I've instantly connected with. And I'm very thankful for them having set the stage for that side of electronic music to become what it is now, because when these guys are at their best, they are able to make life-affirming compositions that can still withstand the test of time long after their original releases. The general consensus seems to be that Moon Safari is the best album, and while I do see why, as it honestly has the best listening experience out of all their records, when it comes to which one of theirs has resonated with me the most, that prestigious honor has gotta go to 10,000 Hertz Legend, man. This is where they started to add in more prog rock and space rock stylings, along with their already established downtempo sound, as well as painting a beautiful picture of that extraterrestrial, planet-like setting Air are coming up with. Seriously, this whole album would fit perfectly as a soundtrack to some generic movie where some astronauts head off into space to discover alien life, or maybe a film about some robot cleaning up garbage on a deserted planet and is approached by another robot who he falls in love with and traverses through the galaxy, and wait, did I just steal that plot from WALL-E? I digress. The point I'm trying to make is that this album is fantastic nearly all the way through, and has, of course, aged very well. But Don't Be Light is truly in its own league of spellbinding. Where to start with this one? There are so many characteristically amazing things about it that just work. So many things about this one that make it so endlessly replayable to unbelievable proportions. Much like the rest of the album it's from, Don't Be Light is built like a landscape, and an undeniably alluring one at that, as the strings and choirs appearing 5 seconds in act as a really great way for the studio to encapsulate the listener into this track's fantastical wonderland of a palette. Just wow. Roger Neal's string arrangements really deliver the wow factor, don't they? They sound uplifting as sin and have me thrilled about the adventure that this track is about to take me on. Another reason why I have it placed up this high is due in part to the memorability that the lyrics provide, as lines like "Don't be lie" and "Maybe like me" allow it to have that catchy factor in the best way that makes it stick in my mind for many more years to come. And while I don't really sing in videos like this anymore, as they kind of come off as cringeworthy and unnecessarily padded out parts in hindsight, I have to make an exception for this one, because the lyrics and melodies backing them up are so goddamn fun despite the repetitive nature of them. We haven't even gotten further into it yet, but Air does really make sure this track never lets up during its runtime, as that lounge E drum pattern calling back to their debut amalgamated with that acoustic drumming results in such a viscerally awesome and well-textured moment on the album and in general, and it shows that this duo is capable of trying to push boundaries and to get out of their comfort zone a bit. And I can say it greatly worked out for them because this combination is flawlessly immaculate. To further add on to the massive amounts of positives I have for it, the electric pianos sound really cool, the occasional sound effects being thrown here, including what sounds like screaming, do a great job at incorporating some sci-fi notions and dramatic stakes into it, the whistling towards the end is pretty fun, and whoever was on that electric guitar can absolutely shred. Like, it's seriously giving off Prince's Let's Go Crazy levels of greatness, and I am so all for it, man. That leaves this one part in the middle of the song I haven't brought up yet, where it sounds like some guy is reading off some kind of monologue. And while it's technically cheesy to an extent, I also really love this part of the song too, as it not only does way more good than harm to its incredible pacing, but it also reinforces my point that 10,000 Hertz Legend would have also worked well as some sort of soundtrack to a space film. He has a very nice smokiness to his low tone of voice, especially when he goes into these la-la-las, and combining that with the aforementioned pianos and the halftime drumming makes his performance that much more effective. I think Don't Be Light is a funny, almost ironic title to describe this track's wonderful sound, because this whole thing is what I would like to call all light. This is one hell of a soul-lifting odyssey from start to end. From the instruments interplay with each other, to the sound effects, to the infectious vocal delivery sprinkled throughout, this stands tall as among the most thoroughly enjoyable tracks they've ever produced. Masterpiece.
Number 2, Nick Cave and the Bat Seeds, Skeleton Tree.
Alright, we've now arrived at the last of my Rob picks, but yeah, I feel like I gotta slow down a bit because we're in for a serious number, people. This video alone hasn't run out of fairly well-known artists that I'm only talking about for the first time on the channel. And the next one that you could add to that list is Australian rock band Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, who have delved into styles of alt-rock, gothic rock, post-punk, and more. While I haven't listened to all of their albums per se, considering their large output, I have enjoyed what I've heard from them so far, and the first one that made me aware of their existence was their 2016 album, Skeleton Tree. And the avant-garde and ambient stylings that they went for here are not the only things that made it feel a bit different from the usual. You see, in 2015, a year before the release of this album, Nick Cave's son Arthur tragically died from an accidental cliff fall at only just 15 years of age. And you can clearly see how much this affected Nick, since he subsequently amended the lyrics on some of these songs during the sessions following this tragedy, as they've been recontextualized to feature themes about death, loss, and grief. And yeah, obviously, I'm not alone in saying that this album is a damn near masterpiece, and is among the most emotionally striking projects of the 2010s, right up there with David Bowie's Black Star and Mount Erie's A Crow Looked at Me. However, like those two records, this album is not for immense replay value due to its heavy subject matter. But what made Skeleton Tree so damn gripping and so incredible to me was the way Nick Cave faces this tragedy in the lyrics. And you could just feel the pain he has from the trauma of losing his son in every single one of his vocal performances. And the title track, man, wow. I almost feel like I'm unwilling to review this one. Mainly because this is one of those rare occasions where all I want to do is sit down and absorb every last inkling of passion and care going into each and every single second of this absolute tearjerker. While the first 7 songs on Skeleton Tree evoke that sense of hopelessness and desolation that perfectly represented the void he felt inside after this loss, the title track closing out the album feels like a moment of acceptance that he's physically no longer here, and finding peace and catharsis in the aftermath of it all in order to adjust to the changing state of the world, featuring gentle but mournful organs, guitars, and pianos, as well as his crooning barely clinging onto every bone in this song's body. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that listening to this one was tough. It legit makes me tear up almost every time I hear it. Even before writing up this segment, talking to myself about what he's singing about has so far never ceased to make me well up with tears of sadness for the poor guy. He starts out the verses using a skeleton tree on a Sunday morning to describe the battle he's had trying to cope with the sheer amount of despair navigating through this loss, as well as the emptiness that he feels while healing and overcoming it, later acknowledging that loving his son that deeply has come with the price of receiving those feelings the moment that he's gone, with the line "nothing is for free" being a stark reminder of the harsh reality of mortality. In the choruses, he recalls how this all occurred while also figuratively trying to bring his son back to life across the eternal void that is the sea itself. And I think these are very powerful lines due to how they constantly bring up the reality of the helplessness a parent feels from his son getting taken away at the hands of death, contributing to the fact that nothing that's coming from all of this is for free. Thinking about it now, the premise of the narrator calling out to a losing loved one reminds me a bit of the Foo Fighters' latest album, But Here We Are, where Dave Grohl was figuratively talking to Taylor Hawkins in the afterlife. Finally, Cave ends this song with the repetition of "and it's alright now." And I think those are the lines that really did it for me, because of the realization that his life is alright, but not alright. Noting that he will continue to keep pushing through to see where the next few journeys around the sun take him, but the persistent, never-ending void that is the death of his son will never truly go away. This is another one of those songs that no matter how much, or in this case, how little I listen to it, or how many sentences I put down, I don't think I could give it enough justice, because everything about this is as tangible instrumentally as it is just absolutely gut-wrenching lyrically. To be able to go through the despondency of the first 7 songs on the album, only to cap the whole thing off with such a cathartic release like this, is what really gets to me right here in the heart. Again, it's not the backstory of what happened that made me want to put it so high on this ranking. It's the downright commendable way that Nick Cave turns this tragedy into a place where he can find solace in the aftermath of all of this. It's the best ending I think that a record that runs as deep as this could have. It lingered on those depressing feelings for a long enough time span, and while it unfortunately doesn't end in the way that gets rid of this nagging void, at least Nick and the gang tried their best to lean a little bit more on that sense of hopefulness. And that's why I love it so much. To be able to do that can result in the creation of that special kind of art that I'm glad exists in this world. And this is indeed a very big example of that. If it hadn't been for a certain other song that's been much more important in my life making the cut, Skeleton Tree would have had the chance of topping this video outright. But trust me, I think we all know what that number 1 is. Let's see what that could be right now.
And finally, number 1, Deadmau5 and Cascade, I Remember.
Yeah, I know I'm predictable, and I'll admit, this might be a teensy bit of a biased pick, but come on, what else was it going to be? Deadmau5, as some of you may know, is my favorite artist of all time. Not only did he get me into electronic music, but a lot of his tracks managed to become so long-lasting and replayable for how much they've helped me with when I'm feeling low and for how much they've held up over time. He's also someone who I often cite as my number 1 biggest inspiration for making my own music as well. And as such, his music has meant a lot to me for pretty much a huge portion of my entire life. And the very first track from him I got into that also kickstarted my music journey as a whole was none other than I Remember, the first post-album single for Random Album Title, as well as the second of many collaborations with fellow producer Cascade. I can recall one spring day in 2011, when it really all began for me. I was only 7 and in the first grade when I was scrolling through my mom's music library on her iPhone, listening to a lot of the songs listed there and having tons of fun doing so, until I eventually came across I Remember. I listened to it a few times through, and then something began to dawn on me. I thought this was the coolest shit ever. So it didn't just make me start listening to all his other classics like Ghost and Stuff, Strobe, and Raise Your Weapon, and eventually all his other stuff as the years went on. It started to resonate with me in a way that no other song I'd heard before had at that point. At that moment, it felt more than just a spark was being lit up in me. It just wound up becoming something that had been stuck with me for a good decade plus. And even now, as a 21-year-old electronic music obsessed weirdo, I still think it's pure platinum in auditory form. To say it's incredible is understating it beyond all rationale. Everything about this one comes together in such a manner that the atmosphere feels so lively and ubiquitous. Listening to this godlike production and mixing throughout its 9-minute runtime is like the equivalent of getting 1,000 warm hugs from a trustable friend group that you can always count on. Those stabbing synths reverberating off this track's progressive house drum patterns are among the best synth choices from both main artists involved, as they further add on to its cozy sound design in such a superlative fashion. It's amazing how these two took the chord progression from an old star from Deadmau5's Get Scraped album and transformed it into a colorful streak of pure bliss in the form of notes that just sound so right when being assembled. And don't even get me started on the uncredited vocals from Hailey Gibby. I've heard some beautiful vocal performances before, but her voice, especially on this song, just rejuvenates my soul. If Romy's vocals put me in a dreamlike daze, then hearing Hailey's is like watching an actual real-life angel being sent down by all the gods above with the mission of blessing me with such gentleness yet prowess coming from her tone of voice. It must take some power for a singer like this to get this kind of reaction out of me on an instrumental that's already as lush and breathtaking as this, because her vocals also have this way of hypnotizing me like nothing, and I mean nothing else has. It's even further helped by the lyrics that are so beyond powerful and timeless, despite the sheer simplicity on its face. In this song, it's basically saying that despite the memories of the past coming back to haunt you, you don't have to keep getting that pain trying to relive the past. Instead, just release yourself from whatever you have within you and be in control, realizing that you don't need to forget anything that may have happened in order to keep pressing on, even if it can be tough sometimes. But it's only through moving on that you can add in new memories that we'll remember for the better. This year so far has been crappy, as watching all the scary things unfolding in the world has never ceased to make me feel frustrated. So I think this message of always moving on in spite of everything that has happened has always been something that I will continue to resonate with for as long as I still stand. This metaphor of turning on the light in the pre-chorus, along with the exclamation of actually remembering in the actual chorus, is something that I still find striking to this day. To me, this is giving the narrator a sight of what she must do to extinguish any negative feelings from the memories of any tumultuous experience that she might have had, along with the mission of following a path that allow her to return to the kind of person that she felt back when times were simpler. Something and I can imagine many other people, can also relate to. It's no secret that we've all had our moments, whether it be for the better or for the worst. And we always want to try to block out any remembrance of any bad moments we might have experienced so we can remember all the memories that can make us feel whole again. But then again, it's never easy to do sometimes. In the end, it's not just the production that makes it special. Honestly, I think it speaks for itself in that regard. It's the sheer durability and overall universal messaging behind this song that truly makes it the best of this bunch. I tried so hard to not want to put this at number 1, because this is almost too obvious of a choice, but putting it any less than that on here would also be lying. Out of all 50 songs I've ranked and reviewed in this video, this song managed to have the best combination of pristine production that can both reignite my childhood wonder and instill a really joyous feeling in me even over a span of many years, angelic and polka-tuned vocals that can command a listener's attention, and an undeniably potent message that can manage to outlast all of us. Whenever there were times when I felt trapped and that there was nothing I could do, this beautiful piece has always been right beside me as a form of therapy for such a long time. It's a song that changed my life and has molded my taste in music to what they have become today, and I genuinely would not want to change it for anything else in the world. And that's why I Remember by Deadmau5 and Cascade is the winner of the first semi-annual Robtastic Grab Bag Ranking event. And that was my ranking proper. Thanks very much to everyone who managed to get songs into rank and review. And for those who tried to do so but couldn't, no worries. There's always next time. Before I end this video, I have 3 things to say. To start, I want to do something that I haven't seen any of my other grab bagging peers do. Stats! Because stats are totally fun and not boring. Firstly, here are the results based on the users whose songs got the most votes, with All Galaxy taking first, Penguin King and Johnny tying for second, and Hardpots and Red Notch tying for third. Next, here are the results based on the users who were lucky enough to have their songs Rob picked, with David Sparks taking first, Seth taking second, and Jacob 2004 taking third. Next, here are the results among the users who got the best average of songs, with Sklitch taking first, DJ Camps Pro taking second, and Jacob 2004 and Vibe Forum tying for third. And finally, here are the results among the users' best ranked songs overall, with the top 3 of course being Hardpots in first, David Sparks in second, and Jacob 2004 in third. Next, I would like to make an announcement that I now have Tumblr! So if you want to see any text post album reviews, then be sure to follow me on there. Requests for these reviews are now open too, so if you're interested, the link to the forum will be in the description after this video premieres. Also, if you see any posts like Music 258 homework insert date here, I actually started my Tumblr account as a way to post any homework assignments for my music technology class, so that's why. Lastly, if you'd like to take a part in the submissions and voting period for the second semi-annual Robtastic Grab Bag Ranking event, that will be opening up on Sunday, July 6th, 2025 at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So you have until then to start thinking about some extra juicy song suggestions for me to delve into. And I bet it'll just be as exciting as before. Totally something I'll be looking forward to for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. If you liked it, be sure to give it a like, share if you want, and subscribe and notifications turned on so you don't miss videos like this one. You can also follow me on Blue Sky or Tumblr, or go listen to my original music on Bandcamp. Alright, that's it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, stay safe, and have a fantastic day.
This has been a special Future Godfather presentation. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.